Humanity's journey to the stars began much earlier than the Imperium existed, during the fabled Dark Age of technology. This era, spanning approximately from the 15th to the 25th millennium, represented the zenith of human technological achievement and expansion. Void-faring vessels of this time bore little resemblance to the lumbering cathedral ships of the modern Imperial Navy, instead showcasing elegant designs that merged function with an aesthetic sensibility now lost to time. The ships of the Dark Age of technology were marvels that modern imperial shipwrights can barely comprehend, let alone replicate. Vessels from this era utilized sophisticated artificial intelligence systems for navigation and combat, negating the need for the vast crews that would later become necessary. Propulsion systems incorporated technologies now considered heretical or mythical: dimensional phase shifting, inertialess drives, and true artificial gravity generation that didn't rely on the rotation of habitat sections. Archaeological evidence recovered from ancient shipyards on Mars and fragments of data looms from Terra suggest these vessels were constructed using molecular bonding techniques that created hulls of unprecedented strength while maintaining remarkable lightness. The most advanced ships featured self-healing superstructures, with microscopic repair mechanisms woven directly into their frames. These vessels could sustain damage that would cripple a modern Imperial battleship and restore themselves to operational status within hours rather than requiring years of dockyard repairs. Weapon systems of Dark Age vessels were equally impressive. Records speak of Nova cannons that could accurately target vessels at ranges exceeding those of current Imperial equivalents by orders of magnitude. More exotic armaments included graviton implosion projectors that could crush enemy vessels without damaging valuable components, and dimensional destabilizers that would partially shift target vessels into the warp, tearing them apart as reality reasserted itself. Perhaps most significantly, these vessels utilized warp drive technologies far superior to those available to the Imperium. While modern Imperial ships must drop into real space periodically to recalibrate their position and are vulnerable during warp transit, Dark Age vessels employed Gellar field variants that provided near-perfect protection. The navigation systems of these ships didn't rely on the psychic abilities of navigators, but instead used sophisticated predictive algorithms coupled with artificial intelligence to chart safe passages through the Imperium. The loss of these technologies during the Age of Strife represents one of humanity's greatest tragedies. As warp storms isolated human worlds and men of iron rebelled against their creators, the sophisticated infrastructure required to maintain these vessels collapsed. Shipyards fell silent, design bureaus were destroyed, and the specialized knowledge required to operate the most advanced systems was lost. By the time the Emperor began his unification wars on Terra, the majority of humanity's void-faring capabilities had regressed significantly. When the Emperor consolidated his control over Terra in the late 30th millennium, his initial fleet consisted primarily of retrofitted vessels salvaged from orbital dockyards and defensive platforms. These ships, while functional, were a far cry from the elegant vessels of the Dark Age. The Emperor's Unity fleet was a patchwork armada of vessels pressed into service out of necessity rather than design. Early warships like the Sublime Consequence and Merciless Verdict were former orbital defense monitors, their hulls reinforced and expanded to accommodate primitive warp drives. The transition from this rudimentary Unity fleet to the early Great Crusade Armada was marked by pragmatic adaptation rather than innovation. The Emperor, despite his vast knowledge, focused on creating standardized vessel patterns that could be produced quickly rather than attempting to recreate the lost marvels of the past. This approach reflected the urgent need to build a fleet capable of supporting his plans for galactic reconquest. The Unification Wars provided an unexpected benefit to naval development. As the Emperor's forces conquered the techno-barbarian kingdoms of Terra, they absorbed specialized knowledge and technical expertise. The Indonesic bloc, for example, contributed significant advancements in void shield harmonization, while the Ursh Kingdom provided expertise in ballistic calculation systems that would later form the basis of Imperial targeting cogitators. As the Emperor's forces prepared to leave Terra's solar system, they encountered a crucial limitation: the lack of vessels capable of extended warp travel. Early attempts to create stable warp drives based on recovered Dark Age fragments proved challenging. The breakthrough came with the Emperor's recognition that human navigators, mutants with the third eye capable of perceiving the warp, could provide the guidance necessary for safer warp transit. This development marked a significant departure from Dark Age methodologies, embracing a biological solution to a technological problem. The Treaty of Mars in the late 30th millennium fundamentally transformed the nascent Imperial Navy. When the Emperor brought the mechanicum of Mars into his growing Imperium, he gained access to the vast shipyards of Mars and the technical expertise of the mechanicum's most accomplished engineers. The Martian shipwrights, who had maintained their own traditions of void ship construction throughout the Age of Strife, brought distinctive design philosophies that would become hallmarks of imperial vessels. The mechanicum's contribution was not merely technical but philosophical. Their belief in the sanctity of certain machine forms led to the standardization of vessel patterns that would remain largely unchanged for millennia. The mechanicum's insistence on redundancy and compartmentalization in ship design, partly driven by their religious veneration of certain structural arrangements, inadvertently created vessels that could sustain significant damage while remaining operational. Under the terms of the Treaty of Mars, the mechanicum retained significant autonomy in naval development. Their forge worlds became the primary construction sites for the expanding Imperial fleet, with Mars itself producing the most sophisticated vessels. The treaty established protocols for knowledge sharing that allowed for rapid implementation of recovered standard template construct fragments related to ship design, while simultaneously restricting certain technologies deemed too dangerous or unstable. The mechanicum's obsessive documentation preserved numerous vessel patterns from the Dark Age of technology, though their understanding of the underlying principles was often incomplete. The Arc Mechanicus vessels, massive exploration and recovery ships used by the mechanicum, represented their most successful attempt to incorporate Dark Age technologies into functional designs. These ships, including the legendary Speranza, contained systems and capabilities that even their mechanicum crews didn't fully comprehend. Among the most significant vessel patterns that survived from the Dark Age were the precursors to the Gloriana-class battleships. These massive warships, intended as flagships for the Emperor's Primarchs, incorporated technological elements recovered from various sources throughout the galaxy. Each Gloriana was unique, built with specific capabilities tailored to the legion it would serve, yet all shared certain fundamental technologies derived from fragmented Dark Age templates. The origins of the Gloriana class can be traced to an STC fragment recovered during the early years of the Great Crusade from the Galatan shipyards in the Segmentum Tempestus. This fragment contained partial specifications for a command vessel designed for extended operations without support. The mechanicum, under the Emperor's direct supervision, expanded on these specifications, incorporating additional technologies recovered from other sources. The construction of the first Gloriana-class vessel, the Bucephalus, took place in the orbital shipyards of Saturn. This massive undertaking required resources from dozens of worlds and the expertise of the most skilled mechanicum adepts. The vessel incorporated a modified warp drive based on principles recovered from the vaults beneath Pavinus, and weapon systems derived from Dark Age templates found in the Librarius Omnis on Mars. Other notable vessel patterns that survived from the Dark Age included the precursors to the Emperor-class battleships. These vessels, while less sophisticated than the Gloriana class, were designed for mass production using standardized components. The template for these ships came from a nearly complete STC recovered from the Jovian shipyards during the Unification Wars. The mechanicum modified this template to accommodate the materials and manufacturing capabilities available to the early Imperium, creating a vessel pattern that would form the backbone of the Imperial Navy for millennia. The mechanicum's approach to adapting Dark Age technologies was methodical, but limited by their religious reverence for ancient designs. Rather than seeking to understand and improve upon these technologies, they often treated the recovered templates as sacred texts to be followed precisely. This approach preserved certain advanced technologies but stifled innovation and prevented the development of truly new vessel designs. Despite these limitations, the early Great Crusade fleet represented a remarkable achievement. Within a century, the combined efforts of Terra and Mars had produced an armada capable of projecting power across thousands of light years. The standardization of vessel patterns allowed for repairs and resupply throughout the expanding Imperium, while the incorporation of navigator houses into the imperial hierarchy provided the means to traverse the warp with relative safety. The fleet that emerged from this period of development bore the distinctive characteristics that would define imperial vessels for millennia: massive size, redundant systems, extensive crew requirements, and an emphasis on durability over maneuverability. These design choices reflected not only technological limitations, but also practical considerations for an expanding empire that couldn't afford to lose vessels to minor damage when operating far from shipyards. The Imperial Navy's command structure evolved from the practical necessities of the Great Crusade into the rigid Byzantine hierarchy that exists in the 41st millennium. At its apex stands the Lord High Admiral of the Imperial Navy, a position of immense authority second only to the High Lords of Terra themselves in naval matters. This office traces its lineage to the earliest days of the Imperium, when the Emperor appointed Admiral Kamenska as the first Lord High Admiral to coordinate the expanding fleets of the Great Crusade. The Lord High Admiral operates from the Naval Administration, headquarters on Terra, a sprawling complex of armored spires and bunkers built into the side of the Himalayan mountains. From this command center, a complex network of astropathic communication relays and courier ships extends the Lord High Admiral's authority across the galaxy. In practice, however, the vast distances and communication delays within the Imperium mean that direct control is impossible, necessitating a carefully structured chain of command. Directly beneath the Lord High Admiral are the 5 segmentum lords, each responsible for naval operations within their respective segmentum: Solar, Obscurus, Pacificus, Tempestus, and Ultima. These individuals command from heavily fortified naval fortresses positioned at strategic locations within each segmentum. The segmentum Solar Lord, by tradition the most senior of these commanders, operates from the Mars naval base, maintaining close coordination with both Terra and the Adeptus Mechanicus shipyards. Each segmentum lord oversees multiple battle fleet commanders, who control the naval forces assigned to specific sectors. These battle fleets represent the primary organizational unit of the Imperial Navy, with each typically consisting of 50 to 75 capital ships and hundreds of smaller vessels. Battlefleet Gothic of segmentum Obscurus, Battlefleet Bacca of segmentum Tempestus, and Battlefleet Solar of segmentum Solar stand among the most prestigious and powerful of these formations. The command of a battle fleet falls to a Lord Admiral, a position earned through decades of service and political maneuvering. Lord Admirals typically hail from noble families with naval traditions spanning millennia, though exceptional officers from less prestigious backgrounds occasionally rise to this rank through remarkable service records or powerful patronage. The Lord Admiral's authority extends beyond purely military matters to include oversight of naval logistics, recruitment, and coordination with other imperial institutions within their assigned sector. Beneath the Lord Admiral serve fleet admirals, who command specific task forces within a battle fleet. These task forces, typically comprising 3 to 6 capital ships and their escorts, represent the operational units deployed to address specific threats or fulfill strategic objectives. Fleet admirals possess considerable autonomy in executing their assigned missions, though they remain accountable to their Lord Admiral for strategic outcomes. The command hierarchy continues with rear admirals, who typically lead squadron-level formations consisting of a single capital ship and its escort vessels. Commodores serve beneath them, often commanding patrol groups or specialized formations. At the lowest level of flag rank stand the captains of capital ships, who exercise absolute authority over their vessels in accordance with naval tradition dating back to humanity's earliest void-faring days. The chain of command aboard individual vessels mirrors this larger structure in microcosm. A capital ship's captain commands through a senior staff including the first officer, the master of ordnance, the master helmsman, and the chief engineer. On larger vessels such as battleships, these senior officers may command staffs numbering in the hundreds. This command structure reflects the dual nature of the Imperial Navy as both a military organization and a political institution. Naval officers balance operational requirements against political considerations, with advancement often depending as much on patronage and family connections as on tactical acumen. The system deliberately incorporates redundancies and overlapping authorities, ensuring that no single commander can easily turn against the Imperium. The battle fleet organization forms the backbone of Imperial naval power projection. Each battle fleet maintains a headquarters within its assigned sector, typically a massive orbital installation combining administrative facilities, training academies, repair docks, and defensive platforms. These headquarters serve as the nerve centers for naval operations within their sectors, coordinating patrol routes, responding to threats, and managing the complex logistics required to maintain vessels, often operating thousands of light years from support facilities. Battle fleets maintain specialized formations for different operational requirements. Battle groups, centered around battleships or battlecruisers, provide the main striking power for major engagements. Patrol groups, typically consisting of cruisers and their escorts, maintain Imperial presence along established shipping lanes and near strategically important systems. Hunter groups, comprised of lighter, faster vessels, pursue specific targets such as raiders or xenos vessels that threaten Imperial shipping. The distribution of naval assets across the Imperium reflects strategic priorities and historical developments rather than a unified organizational plan. Segmentum Solar, containing Terra and the heart of the Imperium, maintains the largest concentration of naval power, with Battlefleet Solar alone comprising over 200 capital ships. Segmentum Obscurus, facing the constant threat of chaos incursions from the Eye of Terror, maintains the next largest force, heavily weighted toward dedicated combat vessels rather than patrol or support craft. Sector naval commands coordinate battlefleet operations with other Imperial institutions within their jurisdiction. The sector commander, typically a Lord Admiral, works closely with the sector governor to align naval operations with broader Imperial objectives. This coordination extends to supporting Adeptus Arbites operations against pirates or smugglers, escorting Administratum Tithe fleets, and providing transportation for Adeptus Ministorum missionaries or inquisitorial agents when required. The relationship between the Imperial Navy and the Adeptus Mechanicus represents one of the most critical partnerships within the Imperium's military structure. While technically independent organizations, the two are bound together by mutual necessity. The Navy depends entirely on the Mechanicus for the construction and maintenance of its vessels, while the Mechanicus relies on the Navy to protect its forge worlds and transport its assets. This interdependence is formalized through the Fabricator General's permanent seat among the High Lords of Terra and the presence of Mechanicus representatives at all levels of naval command. Each capital ship includes a Mechanicus contingent led by a tech priest designated as the chief engineer, who holds authority over the vessel's technical systems independent of the captain's command. This arrangement occasionally leads to tension, particularly when operational necessities conflict with Mechanicus protocols regarding the treatment of machine spirits. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains its own void-capable vessels, including the massive Arc Mechanicus exploration ships and dedicated combat vessels protecting Forge worlds. These ships, while officially part of the Mechanicus rather than the Navy, operate under coordination agreements that integrate them into sector defense plans and major naval operations. During the Gothic War, Mechanicus battle groups fought alongside Battlefleet Gothic against Abaddon's forces, providing crucial firepower and technical expertise. The Navy's relationship with rogue traders presents a more complex dynamic. Rogue traders operate under Imperial warrants that exempt them from many restrictions placed on naval vessels, including prohibitions against combining warp-capable ships with planetary assault forces. Their independence allows them to serve as unofficial extensions of imperial influence in regions where the Navy cannot or will not operate openly. Naval commanders often maintain networks of contacts among rogue trader dynasties, exchanging information and occasionally coordinating operations against common threats. In frontier regions, rogue trader vessels sometimes serve as the only imperial presence, reporting on xenos activities and potential threats. The Navy, for its part, provides rogue traders with access to restricted ports, technical assistance, and occasionally military support when their activities align with imperial interests. This relationship remains carefully balanced. The Navy views rogue traders with a mixture of professional respect and institutional suspicion, recognizing their value while remaining wary of their independence. Rogue traders, meanwhile, cultivate naval contacts as insurance against misunderstandings, while maintaining sufficient distance to preserve their autonomy. The most successful rogue trader dynasties master this delicate balance, securing naval support when needed without becoming entangled in the Imperium's bureaucratic machinery. Perhaps no relationship is more vital to naval operations than that between the Imperial Navy and the navigator houses of the Navis Nobilite. Without navigators and their unique ability to perceive the astronomic and guide vessels through the warp, interstellar travel would be impossible for the Imperium's fleets. This dependency grants the navigator houses extraordinary influence despite their small numbers. Each capital ship in the Imperial Navy carries at least one navigator, with larger vessels often hosting multiple members of a navigator house to provide redundancy and allow for continuous operation. These navigators maintain a unique position within the ship's command structure, neither fully part of the naval hierarchy nor entirely outside it. By tradition and practical necessity, navigators exercise complete authority over warp navigation, with even the most autocratic captains deferring to their expertise in these matters. The navigator houses leverage this indispensability to secure extensive privileges. Naval contracts with navigator houses typically include provisions for luxurious quarters aboard ships, exemption from standard naval discipline, and substantial payment in both currency and rare materials. More importantly, these contracts include guarantees of political protection for navigator houses, with the Navy often intervening to shield their navigators from inquisitorial scrutiny or local planetary authorities. This special status extends to the highest levels of naval command. The Navis Nobilite maintains permanent representatives at Segmentum Naval Headquarters and the Naval Administration on Terra. These representatives participate in strategic planning sessions, ensuring that proposed naval operations remain feasible given navigator capabilities and warp conditions. During periods of unusual warp activity, such as the galaxy-spanning storms that preceded the birth of the Great Rift, Navigator House representatives may effectively veto operational plans deemed too dangerous for warp transit. The practical implementation of this command structure varies considerably across the Imperium. In stable regions with established naval traditions, such as the Ultramar subsector, the hierarchy functions largely as designed, with clear chains of command and established protocols. In frontier regions or areas recovering from major conflicts, the reality often diverges significantly from the theoretical structure. The Badab War provides a notable example of how the naval command structure functions during a major crisis. When Luft-Huron, chapter master of the Astral Claws, declared independence for the Badab sector, the response required coordination between multiple battle fleets and their supporting organizations. Lord Admiral Korth of Battlefleet Maelstrom initially attempted to blockade the rebellious sector, but lacked sufficient forces to completely isolate Badab and its surrounding systems. The escalation of the conflict necessitated reinforcements from Battlefleet Baka and several other sector fleets, creating a complex command situation. Rather than establishing a single overall commander, the Segmentum authorities created a coordinating council comprising the senior admirals from each contributing battle fleet, representatives from the Inquisition, and delegates from the Space Marine chapters involved in the conflict. This arrangement reflected both practical necessity and political reality, as no single admiral held sufficient authority to command forces from multiple sectors. This pattern repeats throughout imperial history, with naval command structures adapting to circumstances while maintaining the fundamental principles of hierarchical authority and distributed responsibility. The system's resilience stems from its flexibility in implementation while maintaining consistency in basic structure, allowing the Imperial Navy to sustain operations across a galaxy of unimaginable scale and diversity. The Imperial Navy's vast armada consists of thousands of vessels spanning numerous classifications, each designed for specific roles within the Imperium's complex void warfare doctrine. At the apex of this naval taxonomy stand the mighty Emperor-class battleships, vessels so massive that their construction requires the resources of entire systems and decades of labor by the most skilled shipwrights of the Adeptus Mechanicus. These leviathans, stretching up to 8 kilometers in length, serve as fleet flagships and strategic assets, their deployment authorized only for the most critical campaigns. Emperor-class battleships feature a distinctive hammerhead prow, housing multiple forward-facing lance batteries and torpedo tubes. Their central hull sections accommodate massive broadside weapons batteries consisting of hundreds of individual macro cannon turrets arranged in cascading tiers. The aft sections house enormous plasma reactors that power not only the vessel's propulsion systems, but also the formidable void shields capable of withstanding sustained bombardment. A fully crewed Emperor-class vessel carries over 25,000 naval personnel, including thousands of gun crews, damage control teams, and engineering staff. Slightly smaller but no less imposing are the Retribution-class battleships, which sacrifice some of the Emperor-class's broadside firepower for enhanced prow armament, typically including a Nova cannon. These weapons fire massive shells at relativistic speeds, creating explosive reactions that can cripple enemy vessels at extreme ranges. The Retribution pattern emphasizes frontal assault tactics, allowing fleet commanders to concentrate overwhelming firepower on specific targets while minimizing exposure to enemy counter-battery fire. The Apocalypse-class battleship represents an older design dating back to the Great Crusade, featuring a more balanced weapons configuration that includes substantial lance batteries alongside traditional macro cannons. These vessels, while less specialized than newer patterns, offer greater tactical flexibility, making them popular among admirals who favor adaptive battle strategies over fixed tactical doctrines. The Apocalypse-class triumph of St. Drusus, veteran of the Angevin Crusade, remains in service with Battle Fleet Calixis, its hull bearing the scars of thousands of engagements across nearly 4 millennia. Grand cruisers occupy the classification between true battleships and cruisers, representing designs that have fallen out of favor with current naval doctrine, but remain too valuable to discard. The Vengeance-class Grand Cruiser exemplifies this category, featuring an archaic hull configuration dating back to the early Great Crusade. These vessels, characterized by their elongated prows and prominent dorsal weapon mounts, lack the engine power and maneuverability of modern cruisers, but compensate with heavier armor and expanded weapons capacity. The Avenger-class Grand Cruiser, with its distinctive split prow configuration, represents a failed attempt to create a more aggressive battleship alternative. The design proved problematic in sustained operations, with structural weaknesses developing around the separated prow sections after extended high-energy maneuvers. Despite these flaws, many Avenger-class vessels remain in service, particularly in Segmentum Pacificus, where their heavy forward firepower proves effective against Orc raiding forces that typically rely on frontal assault tactics. The backbone of Imperial Navy battle groups consists of cruiser-class vessels, ships balancing firepower, durability, and operational range. The Gothic-class cruiser stands as perhaps the most widely produced variant, featuring a balanced armament of lance batteries and weapons decks. These versatile vessels, typically measuring 4.5 kilometers from prow to stern, can operate independently for extended periods, making them ideal for patrol duties in frontier regions where support facilities may be limited or non-existent. The Lunar-class cruiser emphasizes broadside engagement tactics with expanded weapons decks housing multiple tiers of macro-cannon batteries. These vessels excel in fleet actions, where they can bring their considerable broadside firepower to bear while protected by the formation's defensive screen. The Lunar Pattern's weapons configuration makes it particularly effective against enemy escort vessels and light cruisers, allowing it to clear the way for heavier Imperial ships to engage primary targets. Dictator-class cruisers represent a significant modification of the Lunar Pattern, sacrificing a portion of the broadside weapons capacity to accommodate launch bays for Fury interceptors and Starhawk bombers. This hybrid configuration provides fleet commanders with tactical flexibility, allowing Dictator-class vessels to project power through attack craft while maintaining significant direct fire capability. During the Gothic War, Dictator-class cruisers proved especially effective against Chaos Raiders, using their fighter complement to counter enemy torpedoes while maintaining bombardment with their remaining weapon batteries. The Tyrant-class cruiser, less common but highly valued, specializes in long-range engagement with enhanced lance batteries and augmented targeting systems. These vessels typically operate at the edges of Imperial formations, using their superior range to damage enemy ships before they can close to effective firing distance. The Pattern's emphasis on lance weapons makes it particularly effective against heavily armored targets that might withstand conventional macro-cannon fire. Dominator-class cruisers feature an unconventional armament centered around Nova cannon technology, allowing them to engage enemies at extreme ranges. The massive recoil generated by these weapons necessitated significant structural reinforcement throughout the vessel's forward sections, resulting in reduced space for conventional weapons. Fleet commanders typically deployed Dominator-class vessels in support roles, using their Nova cannons to disrupt enemy formations before conventional cruisers moved to engage. The Overlord-class battlecruiser represents an attempt to create a more combat-focused cruiser variant, featuring enhanced armor and expanded weapons capacity at the cost of reduced operational range. These vessels serve as the centerpiece of patrol groups in contested regions, providing the firepower necessary to deal with significant threats without committing true battleships. The Overlord Pattern's emphasis on close-range engagement makes it particularly effective in nebula fields and asteroid belts, where longer-ranged weapons suffer from reduced effectiveness. Light cruisers occupy the classification between true cruisers and escort vessels, providing fleet commanders with versatile ships capable of independent operation while requiring fewer resources to construct and maintain. The Dauntless-class light cruiser, with its distinctive arrowhead configuration, emphasizes speed and maneuverability, allowing it to perform reconnaissance missions and pursue retreating enemy vessels. Despite their classification as light cruisers, these vessels still measure over 1.8 kilometers in length and carry crews numbering in the thousands. The Endeavour-class light cruiser serves primarily as a long-range patrol vessel, featuring expanded fuel capacity and enhanced life support systems that allow for extended deployments without resupply. These vessels commonly operate along established trade routes, providing protection against pirates and xenos raiders while collecting intelligence on potential threats to Imperial shipping. Their balanced armament of lance batteries and weapons decks allows them to engage a wide variety of targets effectively. Escort vessels represent the smallest warp-capable ships in the Imperial Navy's arsenal, designed to operate both independently and as part of larger formations. The Sword-class frigate emphasizes anti-ship capabilities with multiple lance batteries and torpedo tubes concentrated in its forward sections. These vessels typically operate in squadrons of 3 to 5 ships, using coordinated attack patterns to overwhelm larger enemy vessels through concentrated fire from multiple angles. The Firestorm-class frigate modifies the sword pattern with enhanced engines and reduced mass, creating a pursuit vessel capable of running down all but the fastest enemy ships. These vessels excel at interception missions, preventing enemy raiders from escaping after attacking Imperial shipping. Their reduced armor makes them vulnerable in prolonged engagements, but their speed allows skilled captains to control engagement parameters, striking from advantageous positions before withdrawing to avoid counter-battery fire. Cobra-class destroyers represent the lightest classification of warp-capable combat vessels, emphasizing torpedo attacks over direct energy weapons. These small, fast ships typically measure less than 1.5 kilometers in length and carry crews of only a few hundred, allowing them to be produced in large numbers by secondary shipyards. Destroyer squadrons operate as the eyes and ears of Imperial battle groups, performing reconnaissance missions and screening larger vessels from enemy torpedoes and attack craft. System defense vessels, designed without warp capabilities, provide fixed defensive assets for important Imperial worlds. The largest of these, Monitor-class heavy gun platforms, essentially consist of massive weapons batteries mounted on limited mobility hull sections. These vessels, often positioned at strategic locations within a system, provide overlapping fields of fire to protect orbital installations and planetary approaches. Their lack of warp drives allows for significantly expanded weapons and generator capacity, making them formidable opponents for even cruiser-class vessels when fighting in their designated positions. Beyond the standard vessel classifications, the Imperial Navy maintains several specialized ship types for specific operational requirements. The black ships of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica represent perhaps the most feared of these specialized vessels. These distinctive ships, painted in light, absorbing black compounds that make them appear as moving voids against the stars, collect psychers from across the Imperium for transport to Terra. Their specialized containment facilities include psychically warded holding cells and stasis chambers designed to neutralize even powerful untrained psychers during transit. Hospital ships, operated jointly by the Imperial Navy and the Adeptus Ministorum, provide medical support for major naval operations. These vessels feature extensive medici decks with dedicated surgical theaters, recovery wards, and rehabilitation facilities. The largest examples, such as the Mercy-class hospital ship, include facilities for treating up to 10,000 patients simultaneously, with cryogenic storage for those requiring specialized treatment unavailable in field conditions. These vessels typically operate behind the main battle line, receiving casualties via shuttle and providing stabilizing care before transferring patients to permanent facilities. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains its own specialized vessels, operating independently but often in coordination with Imperial Navy forces. The massive Arc Mechanicus ships serve as exploration vessels, technological repositories, and formidable warships when necessary. Each Arc Mechanicus is unique, incorporating technologies recovered from humanity's past and xenotech deemed acceptable for use by Mechanicus authorities. The Speranza, perhaps the most famous of these vessels, contains automated manufacturing systems capable of producing components no longer understood by even the most knowledgeable archmagos. Regional variations in vessel patterns reflect the influence of local forge worlds and historical development across different segmenti. Battlefleet Gothic vessels typically feature more pronounced aquiline prow decorations and extensive external armoring, reflecting the sector's historical emphasis on frontal assault tactics against the frequent Chaos Raiders emerging from the Eye of Terror. These modifications, while technically deviations from standard patterns, receive tacit approval from the Adeptus Mechanicus due to their proven effectiveness in the sector's specific operational environment. Vessels constructed at the Bacca shipyards in Segmentum Tempestus display distinctive layered armor arrangements, with overlapping plates creating a scale-like appearance along the dorsal and ventral surfaces. This modification, developed in response to the Tyranid splinter fleets that frequently threaten the region, provides enhanced protection against the corrosive biological weapons employed by hive fleet organisms. Bacca pattern vessels also typically feature expanded point defense networks optimized for intercepting Tyranid spore mines and boarding organisms. The Horus Heresy shattered not only the Imperium's dreams of galactic unity, but fundamentally transformed how humanity waged war among the stars. Prior to this catastrophic civil war, the Emperor's military forces operated as a unified command structure, with the Space Marine legions maintaining their own substantial fleets of warships alongside ground forces. This integration of void and planetary assault capabilities created potent, self-sufficient forces that could prosecute campaigns across entire sectors without external support. The flagship vessels of this era were the legendary Gloriana-class battleships, each a unique masterpiece of engineering assigned to a Primarch and their legion. These behemoths stretched up to 20 kilometers in length and represented the pinnacle of Imperial shipbuilding technology. Vessels like Horus's Vengeful Spirit, Lion El'Janson's Invincible Reason, and Robute Guilliman's Macragge's Honor combined unprecedented firepower with symbolic importance, serving as mobile fortresses and command centers from which the Primarchs directed their campaigns. The Space Marine legions operated substantial fleets built around these flagships. The Ultramarines' 13th Legion fleet reportedly numbered over 1,500 warships at its peak, while the Word-bearers controlled nearly as many vessels, allowing these legions to simultaneously conduct operations across multiple systems. These fleets included specialized assault craft like the Caestus assault rams and Fire Raptor gunships that could breach enemy vessels or provide close air support for ground operations. When Horus turned against the Emperor, nearly half of the Imperial military forces followed him into rebellion, including substantial naval assets. The traitor fleets included some of the most powerful vessels ever constructed by mankind, with Gloriana-class battleships leading formations of heavy cruisers and specialized assault craft. The balance of naval power initially favored the traitors, with loyalist forces scattered across the galaxy on various compliance operations when the betrayal occurred. The first significant void engagement of the heresy came at the Istvan system, where the loyalist response fleet arrived to confront Horus's forces only to be ambushed by additional traitor legions that had concealed their true allegiance. The Battle of Istvan V demonstrated the catastrophic consequences of the combined arms approach that had characterized Imperial military doctrine. When Space Marine legions turned traitor, they brought with them not only their ground forces but entire battle fleets, creating an unprecedented threat that the fragmented loyalist forces struggled to counter. The traitor fleet's greatest triumph came during the Solar War, when Horus's armada pushed into the Sol system itself. The Void battle around Terra saw thousands of vessels engaged in desperate combat, with landmarks of human void warfare like the Phalanx, the massive fortress vessel of the Imperial Fists, playing crucial roles in the defense of humanity's homeworld. The Battle of Terra's space theaters involved complex, multi-dimensional engagements across the entire system, from the orbital platforms of Luna to the shipyards of Jupiter's moons. The chaos and destruction of these massive fleet actions profoundly influenced post-heresy naval reforms. Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, observed that the integrated command structure of the Great Crusade era had proven catastrophically vulnerable to subversion. When fleet commanders turned traitor, they could bring overwhelming force to bear before loyalist elements could organize effective resistance. This vulnerability became the primary focus of military reorganization during the period known as the Reformation. Robute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, provided the intellectual framework for this reorganization through the Codex Astartes. While primarily focused on the division of Space Marine legions into smaller chapters, the Codex also established strict limitations on void assets that these new formations could control. Under its provisions, Space Marine chapters were prohibited from maintaining true warships, limited instead to strike cruisers and battle barges specifically designed for planetary assault operations rather than fleet engagements. This separation of void and ground assets represented a deliberate weakening of military efficiency in favor of security. Strike cruisers, while formidable vessels in their own right, lacked the sustained combat capabilities of true naval cruisers, with weapons configurations optimized for orbital bombardment rather than ship-to-ship combat. Battle barges, the largest vessels permitted to Space Marine chapters, emphasized troop transport and launch bay capacity over the massive broadside batteries that characterized Imperial Navy battleships. The newly established Imperial Navy gained exclusive control over warp-capable warships designed primarily for void combat. This monopoly on interstellar military transportation ensured that no single military commander could easily move forces between systems without naval cooperation, creating a deliberate check against future rebellion. Even the highest-ranking Imperial Guard generals would henceforth require naval transport to move their forces between war zones, ensuring that military power remained divided between separate organizations with different command structures and loyalties. The physical separation of these forces extended to their base locations. Naval vessels were prohibited from maintaining permanent garrisons of ground forces beyond their standard security detachments, while Imperial Guard regiments were barred from controlling warp-capable vessels. Space Marine chapters established fortress monasteries on single worlds, their limited void assets insufficient for independent interstellar campaigns. This geographic distribution of military assets created practical barriers to unauthorized force concentration, requiring coordination between multiple imperial organizations to mount significant operations. The Reformation period saw substantial changes to vessel design philosophy. Pre-heresy warships had emphasized speed and striking power, designed for the rapid compliance actions of the Great Crusade. Post-heresy designs shifted toward durability and defensive capabilities, reflecting the more cautious strategic posture of an Imperium traumatized by civil war. Hull compartmentalization increased dramatically, with newer vessel patterns incorporating redundant systems and armored bulkheads to survive damage that would have crippled their predecessors. Weapons configurations similarly evolved to reflect changing tactical doctrines. The Lunar-class cruiser, which would become the mainstay of Imperial battle fleets for millennia, featured expanded broadside batteries and reduced prow armament compared to Great Crusade-era designs. This configuration emphasized formation fighting rather than individual ship actions, requiring coordinated fleet operations that prevented any single commander from accumulating too much independent combat power. The Nova cannon became more prevalent in post-heresy vessel designs, providing Imperial formations with standoff attack capabilities that reduced the need for close-range engagements. This weapon, which fires massive projectiles at relativistic speeds to create explosions capable of crippling even capital ships, allowed Imperial fleet commanders to engage enemy formations at extreme ranges. The tactical doctrine that developed around these weapons emphasized coordinated fire missions that required multiple vessels operating in strict formation, further reinforcing the Navy's institutional emphasis on collective action over individual ship initiative. Gilliman personally oversaw much of this naval reorganization during the period historians would later call the Scouring. As Imperial forces pushed back against remaining traitor strongholds, the Primarch used these operations as practical tests for new organizational structures and tactical doctrines. The Battle of Thessala demonstrated the effectiveness of the new approach, with dedicated Imperial Navy warships providing system control, while specialized Space Marine strike vessels conducted precise planetary assault operations, each force focusing on its designated role rather than attempting to maintain the flexible but vulnerable combined operations of the Great Crusade era. The administrative reforms accompanying these tactical changes proved equally significant. Guilliman established the Adeptus Munitorum as a civilian organization responsible for military logistics, creating another institutional check against concentrated military power. Naval requisition now required Munitorum approval, ensuring that fleet operations remained subject to administrative oversight. This bureaucratic layer, while reducing operational flexibility, provided crucial protection against the kind of institutional subversion that had enabled Horus's rebellion. The physical reconstruction of the Imperial Navy following the heresy presented enormous challenges. Nearly half of all Imperial warships had followed Horus into rebellion, with thousands more destroyed in the massive fleet engagements of the Civil War. The great shipyards of Mars had suffered extensive damage during the conflict, with many of the most skilled shipwrights lost or corrupted. Rebuilding the fleet required the development of new construction facilities throughout Loyalist space, leading to the regional variation in vessel patterns that would characterize Imperial naval forces in later millennia. The Gothic sector emerged as a particularly important shipbuilding center during this period. Its orbital facilities expanded to produce the new vessel patterns required by the reformed Navy. The sector's strategic location and substantial industrial capacity made it an ideal base for fleet operations against trader forces retreating toward what would become the Eye of Terror. The distinctive Gothic class cruiser, with its balanced weapons configuration and enhanced void shields, exemplified the new naval design philosophy, emphasizing resilience and sustained combat capability over the speed and striking power that had characterized Great Crusade-era vessels. The Battle of Yerant during the Scouring established many of the tactical doctrines that would define Imperial naval operations for millennia afterward. This engagement saw Loyalist forces under Admiral Rodon engage a retreating trader fleet, attempting to reach the relative safety of the forming Eye of Terror. Rather than pursuing the aggressive close-action tactics favored during the Great Crusade, Rodon employed a methodical approach, using Nova cannon-equipped vessels to engage at extreme range while maintaining a defensive formation that prevented trader fast attack groups from isolating individual Imperial ships. This battle introduced the Rodon pattern deployment that would become standard Imperial naval doctrine, with cruiser squadrons forming the core of the formation, while escort vessels provided screening against attack craft and torpedoes. The success of this approach, which prioritized formation integrity over individual ship initiative, reinforced the institutional changes Guilliman had implemented. Naval officers now trained to operate as components of a larger system rather than independent commanders, reducing the risk that a single charismatic leader could subvert significant military assets. The psychological impact of the heresy on naval culture proved as significant as the organizational changes. Pre-heresy fleet commanders had often developed close personal relationships with the primarchs they supported, creating bonds of loyalty that transcended institutional structures. When primarchs like Horus and Angron turned traitor, many fleet officers followed them out of personal devotion rather than ideological commitment. The post-heresy Navy deliberately cultivated a more impersonal command culture, emphasizing loyalty to the institution and the emperor rather than individual leaders. This shift manifested in changes to naval tradition and ceremony. The practice of naming vessels after specific commanders fell out of favor, replaced by more abstract virtues or historical events. Personal command pennants, which had identified fleet commanders during the Great Crusade, gave way to standardized identification signals. Even the interior decoration of warships changed, with the personalized heraldry of the Great Crusade era replaced by standardized imperial iconography, creating an institutional environment that discouraged the cult of personality that had contributed to the heresy. The naval reforms of this period created the foundation for the Imperial Navy that would endure for the next 10,000 years. By deliberately sacrificing the operational flexibility of combined arms forces in favor of institutional security, Guilliman established a military structure designed to prevent another heresy-scale civil war. The separation of void and ground forces, the limitations on space marine naval assets, and the bureaucratic oversight of fleet operations all served to distribute military power across multiple organizations, ensuring that no single commander could easily threaten the Imperium's stability. The true power of Imperial naval might lies not in its command structure or vessel classifications, but in the devastating array of weapons systems that transform these massive void ships into engines of destruction. At the core of Imperial naval armament stands the macro cannon, the workhorse weapon of the fleet. These massive artillery pieces fire shells ranging from several hundred kilograms to multiple tons, depending on the specific pattern and vessel class. The standard Markov pattern macro cannon found on Gothic-class cruisers fires 4-meter projectiles with explosive cores, accelerated to near relativistic speeds through a combination of chemical propellants and gravitic impellers. Macro cannon technology varies significantly across the Imperium, with regional forge worlds producing distinctive variants optimized for local conditions. The Mars pattern emphasizes rate of fire, with automated loading mechanisms allowing sustained bombardment during extended engagements. The Jupiter pattern, favored in Battlefleet Solar, sacrifices some rate of fire for increased muzzle velocity, making it particularly effective at extreme ranges. The Ryza pattern, with its distinctive blue muzzle flare caused by electromagnetic acceleration components, provides enhanced armor penetration at the cost of increased power requirements. The arrangement of macro cannons on Imperial vessels follows patterns established during the post-heresy naval reforms. Cruiser-class vessels typically mount their primary batteries in broadside configurations, with multiple decks of weapons running along both sides of the hull. This arrangement allows for devastating salvos when the ship presents its flank to the enemy, but creates vulnerable firing arcs directly ahead and behind. Fleet tactics evolved to account for these limitations, with vessels maneuvering to keep enemies within their optimal firing solutions, while supporting each other's vulnerable approaches. Lance batteries represent the second major weapons category in the Imperial arsenal. Unlike the kinetic impact of macro cannons, lances project focused energy beams capable of bypassing void shields more efficiently and burning through armor rather than shattering it. The standard Ryza pattern lance draws power directly from a vessel's plasma reactors, channeling it through focusing arrays to create a coherent beam that can maintain destructive potential over tens of thousands of kilometers. The distinctive red glow of Imperial lance batteries during charging sequences serves as both a technical necessity, as waste heat dissipates through specialized venting systems, and a psychological weapon signaling imminent destruction to enemy vessels. The technical complexity of lance weapons means they cannot match the rate of fire of macro cannons, requiring substantial cooling periods between discharges to prevent catastrophic containment failures. This limitation shapes their tactical application, with lance batteries typically reserved for precision strikes against heavily armored targets or enemy vessels with failing void shields. During the Taros campaign, Captain Artemis of the cruiser Emperors, Wrath demonstrated the ideal use of lance batteries when he targeted the engines of a Tau merchant-class vessel, creating a mobility kill that allowed his ship's macro cannons to methodically reduce the xenos vessel to debris without risk of effective return fire. Nova cannons represent the most powerful conventional weapons in the Imperial Navy's arsenal. These massive accelerator weapons, typically mounted in reinforced prow sections of cruisers and battleships, fire projectiles measuring up to 50 meters in diameter. Unlike standard macro cannons, Nova cannon shells contain complex warheads that detonate at predetermined ranges, creating explosions that can engulf multiple vessels in plasma fire or gravitational distortions. The extreme power of these weapons comes with significant limitations. Their massive recoil stresses hull structures, their rate of fire is measured in minutes rather than seconds, and their minimum effective range exceeds 10,000 kilometers, making them useless in close engagements. Fleet commanders employ Nova cannons as opening weapons in major engagements, targeting enemy formations before they can disperse to effective combat spacing. During the Badab War, Lord Admiral Korth used a synchronized Nova cannon barrage from 3 Dominion-class cruisers to shatter a rebel formation, attempting to break the Imperial blockade of Badab Primaris. The devastating strike destroyed 2 light cruisers outright and damaged several escorts, forcing the survivors to retreat before reaching effective weapons range against the Imperial cordon. Torpedo systems provide Imperial vessels with long-range striking capability independent of their main batteries. Standard Imperial torpedoes measure between 20 and 60 meters in length, depending on vessel class and pattern, with multi-stage plasma drives providing propulsion. Unlike the dumb projectiles of macro cannons, torpedoes incorporate rudimentary machine spirits capable of tracking targets and adjusting trajectories to compensate for evasive maneuvers. The warheads vary based on tactical requirements, with plasma, melta, and vortex variants all serving specific combat roles. The lock-pattern plasma torpedo, standard armament for lunar-class cruisers, carries a magnetically contained plasma charge that detonates on impact, releasing energy equivalent to several hundred megaton conventional explosives. The superheated plasma can overwhelm void shields through sheer energy transfer and melt through meters of adamantium hull plating, creating catastrophic secondary explosions as a vessel's internal atmosphere ignites. The Mark 22 Hellfire melta torpedo, reserved for high-priority targets, replaces the plasma warhead with a melta charge that burns at temperatures comparable to a star's surface, designed specifically to destroy heavily armored components like bridge structures or reactor containment vessels. Most dreaded of all are the rare vortex torpedoes, weapons containing unstable warp breach devices that temporarily tear holes in reality upon detonation. These weapons, requiring authorization from sector command or higher authorities, create localized warp rifts that simply remove portions of target vessels from real space, rendering armor and void shields equally irrelevant. The unpredictable nature of these weapons makes them dangerous to the firing vessel as well, with the potential for warp rifts to expand beyond predicted parameters or persist longer than calculated. Defensive systems prove as crucial as offensive armaments in naval engagements that can last for days of maneuvering and hours of direct combat. Void shields form the primary defensive layer for all Imperial capital ships, creating energy fields that intercept and dissipate incoming attacks. Unlike the power fields used by personal protection devices, void shields operate by shunting incoming energy and matter into the warp, effectively removing the attack from real space before it can impact the hull. This technology, dating back to the dark age of technology, remains only partially understood by the Adeptus Mechanicus, with the construction and maintenance of void shield generators requiring rituals and procedures preserved through tradition rather than scientific understanding. Standard Imperial void shield configurations feature multiple overlapping fields, creating a layered defense that can absorb substantial punishment before failing. The Mars pattern void shield generator, found on Gothic-class cruisers, projects 6 sequential fields, each requiring sufficient damage to collapse before exposing the next layer. These fields regenerate over time as long as the generators remain functional, with engineering crews performing constant adjustments to compensate for fluctuations caused by battle damage or warp interference. The distinctive shimmer of void shields under impact has become a recognized feature of naval engagements, with experienced commanders able to assess an enemy vessel's defensive status by observing the color and intensity of shield reactions to weapons fire. The tactical implications of void shield technology shape naval combat doctrines throughout the Imperium. Shields collapse sequentially under sustained fire, but regenerate if pressure relents, creating a tactical imperative to concentrate fire on specific targets rather than dispersing attacks across multiple enemy vessels. This necessity for coordinated fire missions reinforces the Imperial Navy's emphasis on formation tactics and squadron-level operations, with multiple ships focusing their weapons on designated targets to overcome defensive systems before the enemy can withdraw and regenerate their protection. Point defense systems provide the next layer of protection, particularly against torpedoes and attack craft that might penetrate void shields. The Vulcan Megabolter represents the most common point defense weapon, with thousands of these multi-barreled auto-cannons studding the hulls of capital ships. These weapons, controlled by targeting cogitators linked to Auspex arrays, create interlocking fields of fire designed to intercept incoming threats before they can reach the hull. The standard Vulcan pattern fires 30 self-propelled rounds with mass reactive fuses, detonating in proximity to targets to maximize the effective kill zone without requiring direct hits on fast-moving objects. More specialized defense systems include turbo laser destructors, which project short-range energy beams capable of vaporizing torpedoes and small craft, and flak batteries that saturate space around the vessel with explosive fragments. These systems, while individually less powerful than main batteries, create defensive zones around Imperial vessels that attacking craft must penetrate to deliver their payloads. During the defense of Armageddon, the battle barge Eternal Crusader demonstrated the effectiveness of properly managed point defense when it destroyed 37 Orc attack craft in a single engagement without suffering significant damage, despite being outnumbered and operating with damaged void shields. Beyond these active defense systems, Imperial vessels rely on armor plating as their final protection against enemy fire. The layered adamantium and ceramite hull structures of Navy capital ships can measure dozens of meters thick in critical areas, designed to withstand impacts that overwhelm void shields and evade point defense. Unlike the monolithic armor of ground vehicles, voidship hull plating incorporates complex honeycomb structures and ablative layers designed to dissipate energy and contain damage. The distinctive scarring visible on veteran vessels tells the history of their service, with captains often refusing to completely resurface damaged sections that didn't compromise structural integrity, viewing these battle marks as badges of honor. The Geller Field stands as perhaps the most crucial defensive system for any warp-capable Imperial vessel, though it protects against threats from beyond real space rather than conventional attacks. These arcane devices generate a field of reality that shields the vessel during warp transit, preventing the Immaterium's hostile energies and entities from penetrating the ship. The exact functioning of Geller fields remains one of the Adeptus Mechanicus's most closely guarded secrets, with rumors suggesting the technology involves the sustained dreams of comatose psychers, or the preservation of real space within specialized containment units. Whatever their true nature, Geller fields represent the thin barrier between survival and annihilation for any vessel traveling through the warp. The failure of these systems during transit ranks among the most dreaded catastrophes in naval service, with the resulting warp incursions typically destroying vessels within minutes as reality breaks down within the hull. The Ordo Malleus maintains extensive records of such incidents, though most remain classified at the highest levels to prevent the spread of information about demonic manifestation patterns. Ship-to-ship combat in the 41st millennium follows doctrines established during the post-heresy reforms, emphasizing coordinated fleet actions over individual vessel duels. The standard Imperial approach begins with long-range scanning, using auger arrays to identify enemy formations, followed by Nova cannon bombardment from maximum range to disrupt hostile formations. As fleets close to conventional weapons range, cruiser squadrons maintain formation to concentrate firepower, while escort vessels move to intercept enemy torpedoes and attack craft. The ideal engagement keeps enemies within the firing arcs of broadside weapons, while preventing them from achieving similar advantageous positions. Boarding actions represent a specialized aspect of void warfare, typically employed when vessels must be captured rather than destroyed, or when conventional weapons have failed to achieve decisive results. The Imperial Navy maintains dedicated armsman companies on all capital ships, trained specifically for void combat in the confined, zero-gravity environments of damaged vessels. These naval armsmen, equipped with void-hardened carapace armor and boarding shields, specialize in the methodical room-by-room fighting required to secure enemy vessels. For high-priority boarding actions, Navy commanders may request Astartes support, with Space Marines representing the ultimate shock troops for ship assaults. The teleportarium chambers found on battle barges and some larger Navy vessels allow for direct insertion of boarding parties, bypassing outer defenses to strike at critical systems or command centers. During the Plague Wars of Ultramar, Blood Angels Terminator squads teleported directly into the bridge of the Death Guard vessel Inevitable Corruption, decapitating its command structure and allowing Imperial forces to capture the vessel before its crew could initiate self-destruct protocols. The most devastating weapons in the Imperial arsenal remain reserved for extreme circumstances, employed only when worlds must be sacrificed to prevent greater threats. Exterminatus-grade weapons like the two-stage cyclonic torpedo represent the ultimate expression of Imperial firepower. These weapons, requiring inquisitorial authorization to deploy, contain warheads capable of rendering planets uninhabitable through various means. The standard cyclonic torpedo penetrates a planet's crust before detonating, creating chain reactions that break continental plates and destabilize planetary cores. The atmospheric incinerator variant instead creates self-sustaining firestorms that consume all oxygen within a world's atmosphere, suffocating all organic life within hours. The virus bomb, perhaps the most insidious exterminatus weapon, deploys engineered biological agents that convert all organic matter into highly flammable gases within minutes of exposure. Once this conversion reaches critical levels, the gases are ignited, typically by lance strike from orbit, creating global firestorms that scour the planet's surface. The Life-Eater virus at the heart of these weapons represents one of the most closely guarded biological agents in the Imperium, with production facilities known only to the highest levels of the Inquisition and Adeptus Mechanicus. These planet-killing weapons represent the ultimate expression of Imperial naval power projection, the ability not merely to destroy enemy forces, but to remove their very worlds from the equation of war. The psychological impact of such weapons extends far beyond their tactical application, with the mere threat of exterminatus sometimes sufficient to bring rebellious worlds back into compliance without firing a shot. This balance of terror forms part of the calculus of imperial control, with the Navy serving as both protector and potential executioner for the worlds under the Emperor's rule. The vast cathedral ships of the Imperial Navy represent more than mere weapons platforms or transportation vessels. They are floating cities, home to tens of thousands of souls who will likely never again set foot on planetary soil. Life aboard these massive vessels follows rhythms and traditions that have remained largely unchanged for millennia, shaped by the practical necessities of void travel and the psychological demands of existence in an environment fundamentally hostile to human life. For the common rating, daily existence centers around 6-hour duty shifts followed by 8 hours of rest period, with the remaining time allocated to meals, prayer, and limited recreational activities. This cycle continues without reference to any planetary day-night schedule, creating an artificial temporal structure disconnected from the celestial bodies visible through viewport slits. Most lower deck crew members serve their entire careers without ever seeing natural light, living under the perpetual amber glow of lumens panels and the crimson battle lighting that activates during combat situations. The physical environment aboard Imperial vessels remains harsh by any standard. Temperature regulation varies dramatically between different sections, with engineering decks near plasma reactors reaching sweltering temperatures that require crew members to wear specialized cooling garments, while outer hull compartments often drop below freezing during extended void operations. Gravity plating functions inconsistently on older vessels, creating pockets of reduced or heightened gravitational pull that crew learn to navigate through experience. On particularly ancient ships, entire sections may lack gravity regulation entirely, requiring crew to use magnetic boots or guide ropes to move effectively. Atmospheric quality represents another constant challenge. Despite the best efforts of environmental servitors and tech priests, the air aboard most Imperial vessels carries a distinctive blend of odors: promethium exhaust, incense from devotional shrines, ozone from electrical systems, and the unmistakable biological scent of thousands of humans living in close proximity. Filtration systems struggle to maintain optimal oxygen levels, with air quality decreasing noticeably in lower decks where maintenance receives lower priority. Many veteran voidfarers develop distinctive respiratory conditions, their lungs adapted to the ship's atmosphere but increasingly unsuited to planetary air. Water remains one of the most precious commodities aboard ship, with strict rationing enforced even for high-ranking officers. Common ratings receive water allotments barely sufficient for survival, typically limited to 2 liters per day for all purposes including drinking, washing, and food preparation. Recycling systems recover and purify every drop of moisture possible, with nothing wasted. Even perspiration and exhaled breath vapor are captured by specialized systems in environmental suits worn during high-exertion duties. The resulting water carries a distinctive metallic taste from repeated processing, a flavor so familiar to voidfarers that many find planetary water discomfortingly flat by comparison. Food aboard Imperial vessels reflects similar resource constraints. The majority of crew subsist on nutrient paste produced by the ship's protein vats, a bland substance technically meeting all biological requirements while offering minimal sensory satisfaction. This paste, typically formed into brick like ration bars color coated by nutritional content, becomes the defining taste of naval service. Supplemental items include synthetic carbohydrate wafers, vitamin-enriched drinking solutions, and occasional fresh produce from hydroponic gardens reserved primarily for officers' messes. On extended deployments, even officers find their diets increasingly restricted as fresh supplies dwindle, creating a gradual convergence of experience across ranks. The psychological impact of these environmental conditions manifests in distinctive behavioral patterns among voidfarers. Most notable is the development of acute claustrophilia, the inverse of claustrophobia, with many veteran crew members reporting discomfort in open spaces after years of service. This adaptation expresses itself in crew quarters, where ratings frequently modify their assigned sleeping spaces to create even more enclosed personal areas, using fabric partitions or stacked equipment to fashion nest-like environments within their already confined bunks. Senior officers recognize this behavior as a healthy adaptation rather than deviance, generally permitting such modifications as long as they don't interfere with operational efficiency. Sleep disturbances represent another common psychological adaptation. The constant background noise of a functioning starship, the rumble of engines, the cycling of environmental systems, the creaking of hull plates under stress, becomes so integrated into crew members' unconscious awareness that many develop insomnia when these sounds are absent. Naval medici stations stock specialized sound generators for personnel on planetary leave, recreating the familiar acoustic environment of their vessels to enable rest. Conversely, sudden silence aboard ship triggers immediate alertness in experienced crew, often detecting system failures before automated alarms activate. The social structure aboard Imperial vessels reflects the rigid hierarchies of the Imperium itself, with extreme stratification between different categories of personnel. At the apex stands the commanding officer, typically holding the rank of captain for cruiser-class vessels or admiral for larger capital ships. These individuals exercise authority comparable to planetary governors within their command, with the power to impose discipline up to and including execution. Their quarters, located in the vessel's upper decks, often span multiple compartments and feature luxuries unimaginable to common crew, freshwater showers, private dining areas, and even on the largest vessels, modest gardens or arboretums maintained by dedicated servant staff. Below the captain serves the officer cadre, individuals responsible for specific ship functions, weapons officers, navigation specialists, engineering directors, and departmental commanders. These officers, typically drawn from noble families with naval traditions or promoted from the ranks after decades of distinguished service, occupy an intermediate position in the ship's hierarchy. They enjoy significant privileges compared to common ratings, private quarters, superior food rations, access to restricted areas, while remaining subject to the absolute authority of the commanding officer. The vast majority of a vessel's complement consists of common ratings, individuals who perform the countless tasks required to keep a starship functioning. These crew members typically enter naval service through one of three paths: voluntary enlistment, conscription through the Imperial tithe, or impressment during recruitment drives in void ports. Their lives are defined by the specific departments to which they're assigned, with minimal opportunity for transfer between divisions after initial training. Engineering ratings may serve their entire careers without ever seeing the bridge, while gunnery crews might never enter the engineering decks, creating distinct subcultures within the larger ship community. The press gang remains a legitimate method of crew acquisition throughout most of the Imperium, with naval press officers authorized to conscript able-bodied civilians in void ports to meet manning requirements. These operations typically target the unemployed, petty criminals, or individuals without influential connections, offering them the choice between naval service or punishment for whatever minor infractions might be discovered in their records. Those taken by press gangs receive minimal training before assignment to essential but dangerous roles, reactor maintenance, ammunition handling, or damage control teams, where their expendability balances their limited skills. The most unfortunate crew members serve as indentured workers, individuals sentenced to naval service as punishment for crimes on their home worlds. These personnel, identified by distinctive brand marks or subcutaneous implants, perform the most hazardous and unpleasant tasks aboard ship, clearing plasma conduit blockages, handling toxic materials, or cleaning void exposure damage. Their sentences range from fixed terms for minor offenses to lifetime service for more serious crimes, with survival until sentence completion resulting in reclassification as regular crew rather than actual release from service. Discipline aboard Imperial vessels operates through a combination of formal regulations and traditional practices, many dating back to the Great Crusade era. The Articles of Naval Discipline establish standardized punishments for common infractions, with penalties ranging from ration reduction for minor violations to execution for serious offenses like desertion, mutiny, or negligence resulting in ship damage. Corporal punishment remains standard practice throughout the fleet, with public floggings serving both as punishment and deterrent. The punishment deck, typically located amidships, where the largest number of crew can observe proceedings, features permanent fixtures for restraining offenders during these disciplinary actions. Naval commissars represent the ultimate authority in maintaining crew discipline, operating independently from the regular command structure. These individuals, trained by the officio praefectus, have the authority to execute any crew member, including officers, for infractions involving morale, loyalty, or devotion to duty. Their presence aboard ship serves as a constant reminder of the Imperium's expectations, with even the most senior captains treating them with cautious respect. During combat operations, commissars typically position themselves in critical areas like the bridge or gunnery decks, their presence ensuring that fear of the enemy never outweighs fear of failing the Emperor's service. The extreme stress of naval service, combined with the closed environment and harsh discipline, would make ships ungovernable without some form of release. Recognizing this reality, naval tradition allows for controlled deviations from standard imperial practices. Most vessels maintain areas known colloquially as knuckle decks, unofficial recreation zones, where ratings can engage in activities ranging from trading personal possessions to participating in physical competitions. Ship commanders typically maintain plausible deniability regarding these spaces, allowing their existence while intervening only when activities threaten operational readiness. Religious observance provides another essential psychological outlet for ship crews. Nearly all Imperial vessels contain multiple shrine decks dedicated to the Emperor and various Imperial saints, with particular emphasis on naval patrons like Sebastian Thor and Saint Drusus. Naval chaplains lead regular services tailored to different work shifts, ensuring all crew members can participate regardless of duty schedule. Many vessels develop distinctive religious traditions, incorporating elements of void lore into standard Imperial worship. The veneration of ship saints, legendary former crew members whose service supposedly continues to protect the vessel, represents a common example of these syncretic practices, generally tolerated by the ecclesiarchy as harmless local variation. The relationship between human crew and servitor systems creates one of the most distinctive aspects of shipboard culture. Imperial vessels rely on countless servitors, cybernetic organisms created from human bodies fused with mechanical components, to perform specialized functions ranging from maintenance to weapons operation. These entities, technically neither alive nor dead, occupy an ambiguous position in ship hierarchies. Crew members typically develop complex attitudes toward servitors, combining technical appreciation for their capabilities with superstitious avoidance of their uncanny nature. Gun servitors represent one of the most common specialized types, their human components reduced to little more than a brain and nervous system integrated directly into weapons systems. These entities, permanently installed at their stations, require regular maintenance from both tech priests and medici specialists to prevent tissue degradation. The gunnery decks of Imperial vessels present a disturbing tableau of these hybrid beings, their remaining organic components sustained by nutrient feeds and waste extraction systems that allow them to remain operational for decades without removal from their positions. Maintenance servitors move through the vessel's service corridors, performing routine repairs and adjustments without direct supervision. These entities retain greater mobility than their weapons counterparts, with mechanical limbs adapted to specific technical functions. Many feature multiple specialized appendages that can be reconfigured depending on the task at hand. Crew members often report unsettling experiences encountering these servitors in isolated areas, their mechanical movements and vacant expressions creating an instinctive revulsion despite their essential function. Perhaps most disturbing are the cherubim, servitors created from the bodies of children, used primarily as message carriers and surveillance devices. These small flying servitors, their childlike features preserved while their bodies are augmented with mechanical wings and recording equipment, navigate the ship's corridors carrying communications between officers or monitoring crew activities. Their appearance, combining innocent human features with obvious mechanical modifications, makes them objects of particular superstition among common ratings, who often make warding gestures when cherubim pass. Ship-bound generations represent a unique demographic within the Imperial Navy. On vessels assigned to extended patrols or stationed in remote sectors, crew members may serve their entire lives without making planetfall. In these closed environments, naval regulations permit controlled reproduction to maintain crew levels, creating generations of void-born humans who have never experienced planetary conditions. These individuals, born and raised in the artificial environment of a starship, develop distinctive physiological adaptations, typically taller and thinner than their planetary counterparts, with larger eyes adapted to low light conditions and weaker skeletal structures reflecting development in lower gravity. The cultural impact of ship-bound generations manifests in distinctive traditions and beliefs passed from parents to children. Many void-born develop complex superstitions regarding the vessel itself, conceptualizing the ship as a living entity with moods and preferences that must be respected. These beliefs, while technically deviating from orthodox imperial teaching, generally receive tacit acceptance from naval authorities and ecclesiarchy representatives as harmless expressions of loyalty to their assigned vessel. Common practices include leaving small offerings at junction points believed to be sensitive areas of the ship's anatomy, or whispering, thanks to the vessel's machine spirit after surviving combat engagements. Language itself evolves uniquely in these isolated environments, with ship-bound generations developing distinctive dialects incorporating technical terminology, void lore, and linguistic drift. On vessels with service histories spanning millennia, these linguistic variations can become so pronounced that translators are required for communication with other Imperial forces. The dialect aboard the ancient cruiser Eternal Vigilance, for example, evolved to include tonal elements and grammatical structures entirely absent from standard Low Gothic, reflecting the vessel's extended deployments in regions bordering Tau space. Battlefleet Solar stands as the most prestigious and powerful naval formation in the Imperium, tasked with the ultimate responsibility, the defense of Holy Terra itself. Unlike other battle fleets that might focus on specific sectors or campaign theaters, Battlefleet Solar operates with a singular purpose: to ensure no hostile force ever threatens the cradle of humanity. This mandate has shaped every aspect of its organization, tactics, and vessel deployment patterns. The core defensive formation surrounding Terra consists of 3 concentric spheres of protection. The outermost sphere, extending to the boundaries of the Sol system, utilizes a network of monitoring stations, automated defensive platforms, and rapid response patrol groups. These early warning systems incorporate technologies far more advanced than those found in standard Imperial installations, including gravitic anomaly detectors capable of identifying vessels dropping from the warp at extreme ranges and quantum entanglement communicators that provide instantaneous notification to Central Command without relying on astropathic transmission. The middle defensive sphere encompasses the primary planets of the Sol system, with particular concentration around Jupiter and Saturn. These gas giants host massive orbital shipyards and naval bases, including the legendary Saturn Pattern Yards, where many of the Imperium's most powerful vessels undergo final assembly and blessing rituals. The naval installations orbiting Jupiter include specialized training facilities, where officers selected for potential command positions undergo rigorous tactical simulations and indoctrination in the most classified aspects of Imperial naval doctrine. The innermost defensive sphere, extending from Luna to Mars, represents the densest concentration of military power in the galaxy. Luna itself hosts the Somnus Citadel, headquarters of the Silent Sisterhood, while its far side contains weapon systems of such potency that their specifications remain classified at the highest levels of Imperial authority. The space between Terra and Mars bristles with orbital platforms, defensive monitors, and permanently stationed capital ships arranged in overlapping fields of fire that would render conventional assault impossible. Mars itself forms a critical component of the Sol system defenses, with the Mechanicus maintaining its own substantial fleet centered around several Arc Mechanicus vessels that predate the Imperium itself. The coordination between Battlefleet Solar and the Martian Defense Fleet operates through protocols established during the earliest days of the Treaty of Mars, with joint command exercises conducted quarterly to ensure seamless integration during actual emergencies. The Martian orbital ring contains weapons platforms drawing power directly from the Forge world's massive reactor complexes, allowing for sustained energy outputs that would overwhelm standard Imperial systems. At the heart of Battlefleet Solar stands the Emperor's personal vessel, the Bucephalus, maintained in a state of operational readiness despite the millennia that have passed since its master last walked its decks. This Gloriana-class battleship remains permanently stationed in high orbit above the Imperial Palace, its weapons systems constantly maintained by a dedicated tech priest contingent drawn from the most trusted members of the Martian priesthood. While the vessel never deploys in conventional operations, its presence serves as both practical reinforcement and powerful symbol of the Emperor's continued vigilance over humanity's homeworld. The standard operational pattern of Battlefleet Solar emphasizes depth of defense through overlapping patrol routes and response protocols. Multiple cruiser groups maintain continuous movement patterns throughout the system, their courses calculated to ensure that no approach vector remains uncovered for longer than 12 hours. These patrol groups typically consist of 3 to 5 cruisers accompanied by appropriate escort vessels, with at least one ship in each group equipped with enhanced auger arrays dedicated to detection rather than combat operations. Beyond the Sol system itself, Battlefleet Solar maintains forward defensive positions throughout the surrounding sectors. The most significant of these forward bases is the massive naval fortress orbiting Cadia, positioned to control access to the Cadian Gate, the only stable warp route leading from the Eye of Terror into the heart of Imperial space. Prior to Cadia's fall during the 13th Black Crusade, this installation housed over 40 capital ships and hundreds of escort vessels, supported by orbital defense platforms and ground-based weapon batteries that could project fire into near orbit. The loss of Cadia represented the greatest strategic setback for Battlefleet Solar in millennia, forcing a complete reorganization of defensive patterns throughout Segmentum Solar. The emergency redeployment of naval assets following this disaster stretched the battle fleet's resources to their limits, with vessels pulled from sectors previously considered secure to reinforce critical systems along potential invasion corridors. This redistribution remains incomplete, with many systems still awaiting the return of naval forces diverted to counter the immediate threats following the formation of the Great Rift. Battlefleet Gothic, operating within Segmentum Obscurus, has historically borne the heaviest combat burden of any Imperial naval formation. Responsible for containing Chaos forces attempting to exit the Eye of Terror, this battle fleet has fought continuous actions against traitor forces since the immediate aftermath of the Horus Heresy. This constant state of combat readiness has shaped Gothic into a distinctly aggressive formation, with tactical doctrines emphasizing offensive operations even when conducting nominally defensive actions. The Gothic War, known officially as Abaddon's 12th Black Crusade, represented the most significant test of the battle fleet's capabilities. Beginning in the 143rd year of the 41st millennium, this conflict saw Chaos forces under Abaddon's direct command launch a coordinated assault against the Gothic sector, targeting the mysterious Blackstone fortresses, ancient structures of unknown origin that predated human presence in the region. The initial Chaos offensive achieved significant success, with several key systems falling before the battle fleet could consolidate its forces. Admiral Ravensburg, commanding Imperial naval forces during the conflict, faced the challenge of countering Abaddon's forces while protecting vital shipping lanes that kept the sector's forge worlds supplied with raw materials. His solution divided the battle fleet into hunter-killer groups centered around light cruisers, sacrificing concentrated firepower for increased coverage area. This approach, while leaving individual groups vulnerable to concentrated enemy attack, prevented Chaos forces from achieving the complete dominance of void space required for unrestricted operations. The most decisive engagement of the early Gothic War came at the Gethsemane system, where Abaddon personally led an assault on a Blackstone fortress using the Planet Killer, a massive vessel capable of destroying worlds with its primary weapon. Imperial forces under Captain Abrittle mounted a desperate defense, using the system's asteroid fields for cover while conducting hit-and-run attacks against Chaos supply vessels. While unable to prevent the capture of the Blackstone fortress, these actions delayed the Chaos advance sufficiently for reinforcements to reach threatened systems elsewhere in the sector. As the conflict progressed, Battlefleet Gothic adapted its tactics to counter specific Chaos advantages. The traitor force's willingness to conduct high-energy warp translations directly into combat range initially gave them significant tactical superiority, allowing them to bypass defensive formations and strike directly at valuable targets. Imperial commanders countered by developing the Ravensburg Gap formation, deliberately leaving apparent weaknesses in their defensive screens that would channel enemy forces into prepared killing zones covered by multiple overlapping fields of fire. The battle for the Portmont naval base represented the turning point of the conflict. This massive installation, serving as the primary resupply and repair facility for Imperial forces in the region, came under sustained attack by Chaos battle groups led by the Terminus Est, flagship of the Plague Fleet commanded by Typhus, Herald of Nurgle. The 3-week Void battle saw some of the most intense ship-to-ship combat recorded in Imperial history, with boarding actions contesting control of the orbital platforms, while capital ships exchanged devastating broadsides at ranges so close that vessels suffered damage from their own weapons' radiation wash. Imperial victory at Port Ma allowed Battlefleet Gothic to transition from desperate defense to strategic counterattack. Admiral Ravensburg implemented Operation Radial, a sector-wide offensive designed to isolate and eliminate Chaos battle groups that had overextended during their initial successful advances. This operation emphasized coordination between naval forces and planetary defense units, with ground-based auger arrays providing targeting data for naval strikes against Chaos vessels attempting to resupply or conduct raids. The Gothic War concluded with the Battle of Skyndelgeist, where Imperial forces confronted Abaddon's fleet as it attempted to escape the sector with captured Blackstone fortresses. While unable to prevent this withdrawal, the battle fleet inflicted sufficient damage to render the 12th Black Crusade a strategic failure from the Chaos perspective. The conflict left Battlefleet Gothic severely depleted, but provided invaluable combat experience that would inform Imperial naval doctrine for centuries afterward. The specialized elements of Battlefleet Gothic, developed during this conflict continue to influence Imperial naval organization throughout Segmentum Obscurus. The Agrippina Home Guard, formed from system defense vessels and light cruisers dedicated to protecting the vital forge world of Agrippina, pioneered techniques for integrating non-warp-capable defense monitors into mobile battle groups. By using dedicated transport vessels modified with external docking clamps, these formations could reposition defense platforms to counter enemy movements, creating temporary strongpoints capable of disrupting chaos advance routes. The Cadian Gate Patrol Squadrons represented another specialized formation developed through bitter experience. These units, typically consisting of fast-moving Sword-class frigates supported by Cobra-class destroyers, operated continuous reconnaissance missions along the periphery of the Eye of Terror, monitoring Chaos fleet movements and providing early warning of emerging threats. Their patrol patterns emphasized stealth over combat power, with vessels often running with minimal power signatures to avoid detection by Chaos auger arrays. Following the fall of Cadia and the formation of the Great Rift, the remnants of these patrol squadrons formed the core of what became known as the Imperium Nihilus Squadron, a specialized formation operating in the Dark Imperium beyond the Rift. These vessels, cut off from regular support and resupply, adapted to operate semi-autonomously, developing unconventional maintenance procedures and tactical approaches necessitated by their isolation. Reports filtering back through intermittent warp routes suggest these squadrons have adopted increasingly unorthodox methods, including salvaging and repurposing damaged Chaos vessels to maintain operational capability. The Bastion fleets represent another specialized element of Imperial naval power in Segmentum Obscurus, focused on supporting fortress worlds along the border of the Eye of Terror. Prior to Cadia's fall, the largest of these formations was Battle Group Cadia, consisting of 12 capital ships permanently assigned to system defense duties. These vessels operated in close coordination with Cadia's extensive orbital defense platforms, creating integrated fire plans that could concentrate overwhelming firepower on specific approach vectors while maintaining reserve capacity to respond to unexpected threats. Each Bastion fleet incorporated specialized vessels configured for extended deployment without access to major naval facilities. The Forge Tender-class auxiliary vessels served as mobile repair docks, equipped with fabrication capabilities sufficient to produce replacement components for damaged systems. These ungainly but essential ships typically operated from secure locations behind the main defensive lines, with smaller tender vessels shuttling between them and frontline combatants to deliver critical supplies and technical personnel. The fall of Cadia forced a complete reorganization of the Bastion fleet concept, with surviving vessels consolidated into Battle Group Imperius, a mobile force tasked with responding to major Chaos incursions anywhere along the expanded border created by the Great Rift. This formation operates without fixed bases, instead using a continuous movement pattern between key systems to prevent Chaos forces from predicting its location. The group maintains readiness through a rotating schedule that allows individual vessels to detach for necessary maintenance, while maintaining overall combat effectiveness. Battlefleet Scarus, operating in the galactic northwest of Segmentum Obscurus, developed specialized tactics for countering the hit and run raids favored by Night Lords and Alpha Legion warbands operating from the Halo stars. The Lumanen pattern deployment, named after Admiral Lumanen who pioneered the approach, utilized light cruisers equipped with enhanced auger arrays operating in conjunction with apparently vulnerable transport convoys. When Chaos Raiders moved to attack these convoys, they would find themselves caught between the convoy's escort vessels and cruiser groups moving on pre-calculated interception courses. The Badab War stands as one of the most significant naval conflicts in recent Imperial history, a multi-theater engagement that tested the tactical doctrine and strategic flexibility of Battlefleet Maelstrom against a foe intimately familiar with Imperial naval operations. The conflict began in the year 901 of the 41st millennium when Luft Huron, chapter master of the Astral Claws and appointed protector of the Maelstrom Zone, refused to allow the Administratum's tithe vessels to collect gene seed from his chapter. This seemingly administrative dispute rapidly escalated as Huron, now styling himself as the Tyrant of Badab, declared the Badab sector independent from imperial authority. Battlefleet Maelstrom's initial response proved inadequate, as Lord Admiral Tancredi lacked sufficient assets to establish an effective blockade around Huron's territory. The Tyrant had spent decades preparing for this conflict, systematically strengthening system defenses throughout his domain, while incorporating vessels from the Badab PDF into his own forces. Most concerning to Imperial command was Huron's deep understanding of Navy protocols and fleet dispositions, knowledge he exploited to ambush early Imperial probing actions. The battle for Port Badab highlighted the challenges facing Imperial naval forces. When Battlefleet Maelstrom attempted to establish a forward operating base in the system's outer reaches, they encountered sophisticated minefields layered with targeting jamming devices that rendered conventional auger sweeps ineffective. As Imperial minesweepers worked to clear approach vectors, Rebel strike cruisers launched from concealed positions within the system's extensive asteroid belts, conducting hit-and-run attacks that damaged several capital ships before disappearing back into the gravitational distortion zones created by the nearby Maelstrom. Admiral Korth, assuming command after Tancredi's flagship Vindictive, was crippled during these early engagements, implemented a more methodical approach. Rather than attempting to penetrate directly to Badab Primaris, Korth established a series of fortified staging areas at key navigational waypoints surrounding the sector. This cordon strategy aimed to isolate Huron's forces, while the Navy assembled sufficient strength for decisive operations. The Tyrant countered by dispersing his fleet into squadron-sized battle groups that could slip through gaps in the Imperial blockade, striking at supply convoys and isolated patrol vessels. The conflict's scope expanded dramatically when the Executioners, Mantis Warriors, and Lamenter's Space Marine chapters declared for Huron, providing him with Astartes vessel support including the battle barge Sword of Justice and strike cruiser Gauntlet of Wrath. These vessels, designed specifically for assault operations, conducted devastating raids against Imperial supply lines, utilizing their superior speed and combat power to overwhelm escort vessels before reinforcements could respond. The naval war reached a turning point in 908 with the arrival of substantial reinforcements from Battlefleet Tempestus, including the Overlord-class battlecruiser Vindication and 3 Gothic-class cruisers. This force concentration allowed Admiral Korth to implement Operation Hammerfall, a coordinated push into the heart of Huron's territory, targeting the Sagan system, whose industrial output provided critical manufacturing capacity for the secessionists' war effort. The Battle of Sagan's Belt became a masterclass in void warfare. Korth divided his forces into 3 battle groups: a frontal assault element led by the Vindication to draw defensive fire, a flanking force of light cruisers taking advantage of a gravitational shadow created by Sagan II's largest moon, and a deep strike element consisting of Shark-class attack boats carrying inquisitorial stormtroopers targeting critical orbital manufacturing platforms. Huron personally commanded the defense, utilizing the battle barge Tyrant's Claw as his flagship. His counter-deployment demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Imperial tactics, positioning defense monitors at key translational nodes where Imperial vessels would be forced to reduce speed when transitioning from warp. These platforms, while immobile, carried weapons, loadouts equivalent to cruiser-class vessels, creating killing zones that inflicted serious damage on the first wave of Imperial ships. The battle's decisive moment came when the light cruiser Ararat detected a power signature fluctuation in the secessionist formation's starboard flank. Captain Tekoa recognized the pattern as indicating a scheduled void shield harmonization cycle, a brief vulnerability created when multiple shield generators reset their frequencies to prevent interference patterns. The Imperial flanking force timed their main battery salvo to coincide precisely with this 30-second window, overwhelming the defensive screens of 2 secessionist cruisers and crippling their propulsion systems. With the secessionist line compromised, Korth ordered a general advance, concentrating fire on the now exposed manufacturing platforms that represented the primary objective. The Tyrant's Claw attempted to stabilize the situation, its superior maneuvering capability allowing it to threaten multiple Imperial vessels simultaneously, but the sheer weight of Navy firepower forced Huron to withdraw after 18 hours of continuous combat. The capture of the Sagan system's industrial capacity represented a strategic victory for Imperial forces, depriving the secessionists of irreplaceable manufacturing resources. More importantly, it demonstrated that Huron's forces could be defeated through coordinated action, bolstering Navy morale after years of frustrating engagements against an elusive enemy. The war's final naval engagement came at Badab Primaris itself, with over 60 Imperial capital ships participating in the assault against Huron's remaining forces. The Tyrant had transformed the planet's orbital approaches into a defensive nightmare, with overlapping fire zones from surface batteries complementing mobile defense platforms and his remaining warships. The battle lasted for 73 days, with Imperial forces methodically eliminating defensive positions while establishing landing zones for Space Marine assault forces. Huron's defeat and escape into the Maelstrom marked the end of organized resistance, though Battlefleet Maelstrom would spend years hunting down isolated secessionist vessels that had fled rather than surrender. The conflict provided valuable lessons in conducting operations against forces using Imperial tactics and equipment, with particular emphasis on the challenges posed by renegade Astartes vessels operating in support of conventional naval forces. The First War for Armageddon presented an entirely different challenge for Imperial naval forces, confronting a demonic armada led by the Primarch Angron himself. The conflict began in the year 444 of the 41st millennium, when a massive space hulk designated Devourer of Stars emerged from the warp in the Armageddon system. Before Battlefleet Armageddon could establish quarantine procedures, multiple landing craft launched from the hulk, delivering World Eater's Chaos Space Marines and their demonic allies to the planet's surface. Admiral Parole, commanding the system's naval assets, faced an unprecedented tactical situation as the Space Hulk began to radiate extreme warp energy readings. Augur operators reported that the Hulk's surface appeared to be bleeding into space, with materials that registered as simultaneously solid and immaterial. When Parole ordered Lance batteries to fire on the anomalous readings, the energy discharges created cascading warp reactions that damaged the firing vessel's Geller field generators. The true nature of the threat became apparent when the space around the Hulk appeared to tear open, disgorging vessels that defied conventional understanding of shipbuilding. These demon ships, physical manifestations of warp entities bound into shapes resembling twisted parodies of Imperial warships, ignored void shield impacts and regenerated damage that should have been catastrophic. Their weapons fired streams of what appeared to be liquid fire that bypassed void shields entirely, directly impacting hull materials and continuing to burn even in vacuum. Battlefleet Armageddon's initial engagement proved disastrous. The cruiser Emperor's Wrath closed to extreme short range, attempting to deliver a devastating broadside against what appeared to be the command vessel of the demonic fleet. The macrocannon shells passed through the target without apparent effect, while return fire transformed the cruiser's port flank into a charnel house as bulkheads melted and crew members combusted at their stations. Of the 16 vessels that participated in this first engagement, only 3 survived to retreat to the system's outer reaches. Admiral Parole recognized that conventional void warfare tactics would prove ineffective against this threat and implemented Emergency Protocol Theta, the complete evacuation of naval personnel from the system to preserve their specialized knowledge and skills. The remaining vessels covered this withdrawal, while planetary defense forces prepared for ground combat. This controversial decision would later be vindicated when investigations revealed that naval personnel exposed to direct visual contact with the demon ships experienced catastrophic psychological breakdown, with entire bridge crews descending into madness after prolonged engagement. The arrival of Space Wolves forces under the command of Logan Grimnar changed the strategic equation. Rather than engaging the demonic fleet directly, Grimnar ordered his vessels to conduct extreme-range bombardment of the space hulk itself, targeting what his rune priests identified as anchor points, where the structure maintained its connection to real space. This approach proved effective, with each successful strike causing multiple demon ships to lose cohesion and dissolve back into warp energy. The most significant naval action came when the battle barge Fenrisian Vengeance executed a daring attack run against the space hulk's central mass. Rather than using conventional weapons, the vessel launched a unique payload, a strike force of Grey Knight's Terminators equipped with specialized warp-disruptive devices. These warriors teleported directly into what appeared to be the Hulk's central chamber, confronting the ritual that maintained the demonic manifestation in real space. The Grey Knight's assault succeeded in disrupting the warp connection, causing the demonic fleet to lose coherence and dissolve back into the Imperium. While the ground war would continue for months afterward, the naval phase of the conflict effectively ended with this operation. The experience fundamentally changed how Battlefleet Armageddon approached warp-related threats, with new protocols emphasizing extreme-range engagement and the avoidance of direct fire exchanges with warp entities. The Damocles Gulf Crusade marked the Imperium's first major naval confrontation with the expanding Tau Empire, presenting challenges entirely different from those posed by Chaos or other established enemies. Beginning in 742, the Crusade aimed to check Tau expansion into Imperial space by delivering a decisive military defeat to this emerging xenos power. Battlefleet Damocles, assembled specifically for this operation, consisted of vessels drawn from multiple sector battle fleets, creating initial command challenges as officers accustomed to different tactical doctrines attempted to coordinate their actions. Lord Admiral Wrath, granted overall command, implemented standardized communication protocols, and conducted several training exercises during the fleet's warp transit to establish common operational procedures. The Crusade's first significant naval engagement occurred at the Daleth system, a major Tau population center. Imperial planners had anticipated that the technologically advanced but numerically inferior Tau fleet would adopt defensive positions around their core worlds, allowing the Imperial Armada to bring its superior firepower to bear in a conventional set-piece battle. Instead, they encountered a completely different approach to void warfare. Rather than concentrating their forces, the Tau deployed multiple small squadrons of escort-sized vessels that refused decisive engagement, instead conducting long-range harassment using weapons unlike anything in the Imperial arsenal. These gravitic drive ships demonstrated maneuverability that made targeting with conventional Imperial fire control systems nearly impossible, while their ion cannons delivered precisely calibrated energy pulses that overloaded void shield generators without necessarily damaging the underlying hull. Most concerning to Imperial commanders was the Tau's apparent ability to coordinate their actions with unprecedented precision across vast distances. Ships operating thousands of kilometers apart executed synchronized maneuvers that allowed them to concentrate fire on specific Imperial vessels before dispersing again. Captured communications indicated these coordinated actions operated on a non-standard frequency that Imperial ships could detect but not decode, suggesting some form of advanced targeting and command network. Admiral Wrath adapted Imperial tactics by implementing what became known as the Castrum pattern deployment, concentrating his capital ships in mutually supporting defensive formations while detaching destroyer squadrons to conduct aggressive counterattacks against Tau harassment groups. This approach sacrificed offensive momentum, but prevented the Tau from isolating and destroying individual Imperial vessels through their superior maneuverability. The battle for the Daleth approach demonstrated the fundamental differences in naval philosophy between the two powers. When the cruiser Retribution suffered drive system damage that left it vulnerable, 2 additional cruisers moved to defensive positions alongside it, creating an overlapping fire zone that deterred Tau attacks while repair crews worked. The Tau commander, rather than accepting heavy losses to destroy a crippled enemy, simply redeployed to attack softer targets elsewhere in the system. This pragmatic approach prioritized strategic objectives over the total destruction of enemy forces, a concept initially interpreted as cowardice by Imperial officers, but later recognized as calculated efficiency. The most significant technological surprise came when Imperial forces encountered the first Tau carrier vessels. Unlike Imperial ships that carried attack craft as secondary systems, these vessels were designed specifically around launch bay operations, carrying substantially larger complements of strike craft than equivalently sized Imperial ships. These craft, designated Barracudas in Imperial classification systems, demonstrated performance characteristics superior to Navy Fury interceptors, particularly in acceleration and weapons range. The Tau carriers themselves remained at extreme range from Imperial formations, using their strike craft as the primary offensive arm while maintaining constant movement to avoid counter-battery fire. This doctrine, entirely different from Imperial carrier operations that integrated attack craft into broader fleet actions, required fundamental adjustments to Navy defensive patterns. Admiral Rath ordered a reprioritization of point defense systems, with turret crews instructed to focus on incoming strike craft rather than maintaining balanced coverage against multiple threat types. The Crusades' naval operations reached their climax with the Battle of the Hydes Rift, where Imperial forces attempted to force passage through a narrow region of stable space to reach the Tau core worlds. The Tau defense relied on a previously unseen vessel class, massive ships designated custodians by Imperial observers, which appeared to serve as mobile fortress platforms. These vessels, while lacking the speed to actively engage Imperial ships, carried weapons of unprecedented power for their size, creating kill zones that forced the Imperial fleet to either accept severe casualties or find alternative approach vectors. Admiral Rath chose to withdraw rather than expend irreplaceable ships against these defenses, a decision that proved controversial but ultimately sound when considering the Crusades' broader strategic context. The Damocles Gulf Crusade ended with a negotiated withdrawal rather than decisive victory for either side, but the naval lessons learned would prove invaluable in subsequent centuries, as Tau expansion brought them into conflict with Imperial forces across multiple sectors. The Indomitus Crusade, launched in the wake of Robute Guilliman's return and the formation of the Great Rift, represented the most ambitious naval operation since the Great Crusade itself. With half the Imperium cut off by the massive warp storm dividing the galaxy, the Crusade aimed to restore Imperial control in critical sectors while delivering Primaris Space Marine reinforcements to beleaguered chapters. The naval elements of the Crusade centered around the newly constructed Gloriana-class battleship Macraga's Honor, Guilliman's flagship reconstructed to specifications not seen since the Great Crusade era. This vessel, incorporating technologies recovered from ancient data stores on Mars, demonstrated capabilities exceeding standard Imperial battleships, particularly in warp translation precision and void shield regeneration rates. The symbolic importance of a Primarch once again commanding from a Gloriana-class vessel was not lost on Imperial forces, with many viewing it as tangible evidence of the Emperor's continued favor. Fleet Admiral Spire, granted operational command of the Crusades' naval forces under Guilliman's strategic direction, implemented a revolutionary approach to fleet organization. Rather than maintaining rigid battle group structures throughout the campaign, Spire adopted a modular system where task forces could be rapidly reconfigured based on mission requirements. This approach, drawing on Guilliman's own tactical flexibility, allowed the Crusade fleet to simultaneously conduct operations across multiple subsectors without diluting its overall combat effectiveness. The most significant innovation came in the Crusades' approach to warp travel. Traditional Imperial naval operations accepted substantial variance in arrival times when multiple vessels translated from the warp, with formation integrity maintained by conservative transit protocols that prioritized safety over speed. The Indomitus Crusade, benefiting from Guilliman's strategic genius and the Primarch's personal understanding of warp mechanics, implemented precisely calculated mass translation maneuvers that delivered entire battle groups into real space in tight formation, ready for immediate combat operations. This capability proved decisive during the liberation of Gathalammer, where Chaos forces had established a substantial orbital presence supporting their ground operations. The Crusade fleet translated directly into attack formation less than 10,000 kilometers from the primary Chaos vessels, launching torpedoes and attack craft before the enemy could recover from the shock of their arrival. This perfectly executed Alpha Strike destroyed over 60% of the Chaos fleet's combat capacity in the first hour of engagement, allowing Imperial forces to establish orbital supremacy with minimal losses. The Crusade's naval doctrine emphasized rapid, overwhelming force application, followed by immediate redeployment to subsequent objectives. Rather than becoming entangled in extended campaigns to secure individual systems, Guilliman directed naval forces to focus on destroying enemy combat capabilities and delivering ground forces before moving to the next target. This approach, while sometimes leaving systems with ongoing ground conflicts, allowed the Crusade to maintain offensive momentum across a vast front, preventing enemy forces from concentrating against individual Imperial thrusts. The trembling fingers of navigator Elias Caranvar traced the ornate golden pathways etched into the ceiling of his navigation sanctum aboard the Imperial cruiser Righteous Fury. His third eye, normally hidden beneath a jeweled diadem, now lay exposed, its pupil dilated and pulsing with an unnatural light as it gazed into dimensions beyond human comprehension. The navigator's sanctum represented the most heavily warded chamber on any Imperial vessel, its walls inscribed with hexagrammic wards and psychically attuned crystals designed to focus the navigator's abilities while providing some measure of protection from the raw energies of the Imperium. Translation in 3 minutes, voxed the ship's first officer from the bridge, his voice betraying the tension that always accompanied warp transitions. The navigator did not respond verbally, his consciousness already stretched between realms as he guided the massive vessel through the treacherous currents of the warp. His physical body remained secured in the specially designed throne at the center of the sanctum, intravenous tubes providing carefully formulated nutrients and stabilizing chemicals to sustain him during extended navigational trances. For the navigator, the imminent translation back to real space represented the most dangerous moment of any warp journey, the point when the ship existed simultaneously in both dimensions, vulnerable to the predatory entities that constantly sought entry into the material universe. The Navis Nobilite, the navigator houses, represent one of the Imperium's oldest and most essential institutions. Their origins stretch back to humanity's earliest experiments with warp travel during the Dark Age of technology, when genetic manipulation created the first three-eyed humans capable of perceiving the currents of the Imperium. These original navigators, their genetic modifications stabilized through careful breeding programs, formed the foundation of the navigator houses that would eventually sign the Treaty of Terra with the Emperor himself, securing their position as an essential pillar of the nascent Imperium. The navigator's third eye represents the physical manifestation of their unique mutation, a specialized organ that allows them to perceive the warp directly while remaining anchored in real space. This ability proves essential for interstellar travel, as it allows navigators to detect the psychic beacon of the astronomicon emanating from Terra and use it as a fixed reference point within the constantly shifting tides of the Imperium. Without this capability, warp travel would be limited to extremely short hops using calculated jumps, making the maintenance of a galaxy spanning empire practically impossible. The relationship between the Imperial Navy and the navigator houses operates through a complex system of contracts and traditions dating back to the Great Crusade. Each navigator house maintains its own fleet of ornate transport vessels used to convey their members to naval vessels requiring their services. These transports, exempt from standard Imperial shipping regulations through ancient charter, often represent some of the most luxurious vessels operating in Imperial space, their interiors decorated with priceless artifacts and attended by small armies of servants dedicated to maintaining the comfort of their navigator passengers. Once aboard a naval vessel, a navigator occupies an unusual position within the command structure. While technically under the captain's authority regarding operational decisions, the navigator retains complete autonomy in matters relating to warp navigation. Even the most decorated admiral would not presume to countermand a navigator's assessment regarding warp conditions or safe translation points. This arrangement occasionally creates tension, particularly during military operations, where strategic considerations might pressure commanders to request more aggressive navigation than the navigator deems prudent. The physical accommodations provided for navigators aboard naval vessels reflect their privileged status. While common ratings might share cramped dormitories with dozens of others, a navigator's quarters typically occupy an entire subdeck, with specialized facilities designed to accommodate their unique physiological needs. These areas remain off-limits to regular crew, attended only by specially vetted servants, often provided by the navigator house itself, rather than drawn from naval personnel. This separation reinforces the mystique surrounding navigators, while providing practical protection for individuals whose mutation would be considered aberrant in any other context. The actual process of warp navigation combines elements of science, intuition, and abilities that defy conventional explanation. Before a vessel can enter the warp, its navigator must conduct extensive preparations, consulting astronomical charts and warp current predictions, while performing personal rituals developed through generations of navigational experience. Many navigators maintain journals recording successful passages, creating family grimoires that pass from one generation to the next, containing wisdom that cannot be quantified in standard navigational terms. When a vessel activates its warp engines, the navigator enters a specialized trance state, their consciousness partially extending into the Imperium, while their physical body remains protected within the navigation sanctum. Through their third eye, they perceive the warp not as the chaotic maelstrom it appears to normal human senses, but as a complex pattern of currents, eddies, and disturbances that can be interpreted and navigated. The astronomicon serves as their primary reference point, a psychic beacon that appears to navigators as a distant light against which all other warp phenomena can be measured. The dangers facing navigators extend beyond the standard hazards of warp travel. Extended exposure to the Imperium through their third eye takes a physical toll, aging them prematurely and eventually causing mental deterioration if they fail to take appropriate precautions. Most experienced navigators develop distinctive physical characteristics: pale, almost translucent skin, elongated fingers, and subtle alterations to facial structure that betray their non-standard genetic heritage. These changes, combined with the necessity of concealing their third eye when among normal humans, contribute to their isolation even when not actively navigating. More insidious are the psychological effects of repeated warp exposure. Navigators who spend decades guiding vessels through the Imperium often develop unusual perceptual quirks, seeing momentary overlays of warp phenomena in real space or perceiving time in non-linear patterns. Naval medical personnel receive specialized training in monitoring navigators for signs of more serious deterioration, with protocols established for removing a navigator from duty if they begin showing dangerous levels of warp contamination. These protocols remain classified at the highest levels, as the specifics of navigator psychology represent sensitive information that could potentially be exploited by enemies of the Imperium. The technical interface between a navigator and a vessel's warp drive represents one of the most complex systems aboard any Imperial ship. The navigational cogitator matrix serves as the primary connection, translating the navigator's perceptions and directions into technical adjustments to the warp drive's operation. This system combines ancient technologies maintained by the Adeptus Mechanicus with components unique to each navigator house, often incorporating family heirlooms whose functions transcend standard Imperial technology. The most sophisticated examples include crystalline meditation, arrays that amplify a navigator's perceptions, and specialized chronometers that track the passage of time across dimensional boundaries. Warp engines themselves represent the pinnacle of Imperial technology, combining the material sciences of the Adeptus Mechanicus with esoteric principles that border on the metaphysical. The standard Jovian pattern warp drive found on Imperial cruisers creates a localized field that transitions the vessel from real space into the Imperium, essentially punching a controlled hole between dimensions. The immense energy requirements for this transition necessitate dedicated plasma reactors separate from those powering the vessel's conventional systems, with extensive shielding to prevent warp energy contamination of the ship's interior. The physical structure of a warp drive incorporates components whose functions remain partly mysterious even to the tech priests who maintain them. The transliminal core, a spherical chamber at the heart of the drive system, contains materials and geometries that appear to exist partially outside conventional physics, their properties measurable only through specialized equipment calibrated to detect warp-influenced phenomena. The maintenance rituals for these components combine practical engineering with devotional practices that have remained unchanged for millennia, reflecting the Mechanicus's approach to technology they can replicate but not fully comprehend. The Geller field generator represents the single most important protective system aboard any warp-capable vessel. Without this technology, any ship entering the warp would be instantly overwhelmed by its hostile environment and the predatory entities that inhabit it. The field projects what essentially amounts to a bubble of real space around the vessel, preventing direct contact between the ship and the raw immaterium. The exact functioning of Geller fields remains one of the Imperium's most closely guarded technological secrets, with even high-ranking tech priests knowing only the specific aspects relevant to their responsibilities rather than understanding the complete system. Rumors persist about the true nature of Geller field technology, with some sources suggesting the fields are generated through the controlled dreams of specially prepared psychers maintained in suspended animation within the generator housing. Whether accurate or not, such accounts reflect the unsettling reality that much of the Imperium's most essential technology incorporates elements that would be considered horrific by the standards of earlier human civilizations. The necessity of these systems for interstellar travel represents one of the countless moral compromises required to maintain humanity's galactic presence in the hostile environment of the 41st millennium. The practical operation of Geller fields requires constant monitoring by specialized tech priests who watch for fluctuations that might indicate incipient failure. Even minor instabilities can create dangerous situations, as the barrier between real space and the warp temporarily thins in localized areas. These Geller faults manifest in various ways: unusual cold spots, temporary shifts in gravity, or brief audio distortions that sound disturbingly like whispers in unknown languages. Standard naval protocol requires immediate reporting of such phenomena, with response teams dispatched to reinforce the spiritual and technological protections in affected areas. Complete Geller field failure represents the most catastrophic emergency possible during warp transit. In such situations, survival depends entirely on the speed with which the ship can execute an emergency translation back to real space, a dangerous maneuver that risks materializing the vessel inside solid matter if performed without proper navigational calculations. Naval records document few instances of vessels surviving catastrophic field failure, and those that do typically report casualty rates exceeding 70% among crew, with survivors often exhibiting psychological trauma, requiring extensive treatment by both medical personnel and representatives of the ecclesiarchy. Astropaths represent the second category of specialized psychers essential to naval operations. Unlike navigators, who perceive and interpret the warp for navigational purposes, astropaths project their consciousness into the immaterium to transmit and receive messages across interstellar distances. This capability provides the only practical means of faster-than-light communication in the Imperium, allowing coordination between widely separated naval forces that would otherwise operate in complete isolation. The creation of an astropath involves a process known as soul binding, a psychic connection to the Emperor himself performed on Terra under the supervision of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. This ritual, while protecting the astropath from the worst dangers of the warp, exacts a terrible price. The overwhelming psychic presence of the Emperor burns out the astropath's physical eyes, leaving them blind in conventional terms while granting enhanced psychic perception. This blindness serves as both a practical consequence and a symbolic representation of the astropath's separation from the material concerns of normal humans. Aboard naval vessels, astropaths occupy specialized chambers similar to but distinct from those used by navigators. While navigator sanctums focus on enhancing perception of warp currents, astropathic chambers incorporate features designed to amplify transmission and reception of psychic messages. These rooms typically include resonator crystals arranged in precise geometric patterns, psychically reactive incense burners that help focus the astropath's concentration, and warding systems that protect both the astropath and the vessel from hostile entities that might be attracted to psychic activity. The transmission of astropathic messages involves translating conventional information into symbolic forms that can survive passage through the warp. Rather than sending words directly, astropaths convert concepts into complex metaphors and archetypal images that resist corruption by warp influences. The receiving astropath then interprets these symbols back into conventional language, a process that introduces inevitable ambiguities and potential misunderstandings. For this reason, naval astropathic communications typically incorporate multiple redundancies and authentication codes to ensure critical information remains intact. The relationship between astropaths and naval command structures differs significantly from that of navigators. While navigators maintain substantial autonomy due to their unique house affiliations, astropaths are direct servants of the Imperium, having undergone soul binding and training under imperial institutions. This distinction results in astropaths being more fully integrated into naval hierarchy, typically holding commissioned rank and being subject to military discipline. Nevertheless, the specialized nature of their abilities grants them significant practical authority in their domain, with senior astropaths often serving as advisors to flag officers on matters relating to warp phenomena and long-range communications. The physical toll of astropathic communication manifests differently from navigational strain. While navigators age prematurely from extended warp exposure, astropaths experience more acute effects from each significant transmission or reception. Major communications can leave an astropath physically exhausted, requiring days of recovery for particularly complex or long-range messages. This limitation shapes naval communication protocols, with commanders carefully prioritizing messages based on urgency and strategic importance to avoid overwhelming their astropathic resources. The dangers facing Imperial vessels during warp transit extend beyond the technical challenges of navigation and field maintenance. The Imperium itself represents a fundamentally hostile environment, inhabited by entities ranging from minor warp predators to fully manifested demons of the Chaos Gods. These beings constantly seek entry into real space, probing for weaknesses in Geller fields, and attempting to influence susceptible crew members through dreams and subtle psychological manipulation. Naval protocols for warp transit acknowledge these dangers through both practical and spiritual measures. From a practical perspective, vessels entering the warp implement enhance security procedures, including increased watch rotations, regular inspection of sensitive areas, and power down of non-essential systems to minimize potential entry points for warp entities. Specialized auger arrays designed to detect reality fluctuations operate continuously, monitoring for signs of immaterial intrusion that would not register on conventional sensors. The spiritual aspects of warp protection hold equal importance in naval doctrine. Chaplains and ecclesiarchy representatives conduct regular blessings throughout the vessel before warp translation, focusing particularly on vulnerable areas like Geller field generators and navigational systems. Many ships maintain dedicated shrine chambers where crew members can strengthen their spiritual resolve through prayer and devotional rituals. These practices, while appearing superstitious to outside observers, represent practical psychological defenses against the subtle influences of the warp, reinforcing crew members' connection to real space and the Emperor's protection. Temporal distortions represent one of the most disorienting aspects of warp travel for naval personnel. The non-linear nature of time within the Imperium means that journeys of identical distance can take dramatically different durations depending on warp conditions. A voyage that requires 2 weeks under favorable circumstances might extend to months or even years if the ship encounters warp storms or unusual currents. Even more disconcerting, the passage of time aboard the vessel may not correspond to time in real space, with cases documented of ships emerging from the warp decades or centuries after their departure despite experiencing only weeks of subjective time in transit. These temporal uncertainties necessitate specialized naval protocols for long-duration warp journeys. Vessels carry extensive supply reserves calculated to sustain the crew for periods far exceeding the expected transit time. Cryogenic stasis facilities provide options for preserving critical personnel if supplies begin running low, while hydroponics bays capable of producing supplemental nutrition operate on most capital ships. The psychological impact of extended warp transit receives equal attention, with structured activity schedules and regular drills designed to maintain crew cohesion and mental health during periods when the vessel exists in a state of effective isolation from the broader Imperium. The most extreme temporal anomalies occur when vessels become warp-locked, trapped in localized eddies within the Imperium where time flows at drastically altered rates. Naval records contain accounts of ships emerging from such conditions with crews that experienced subjective centuries, while only months passed in real space, their cultures and languages having evolved into barely recognizable forms during their isolated existence. Equally disturbing are cases where crews experienced only days of transit, while centuries passed outside, emerging to find an Imperium transformed by events they never witnessed, and where all their known contacts have long since died. The massive orbital shipyards of Cipra Mundi hang like industrial constellations against the void, their sprawling frameworks extending for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Countless gantries, assembly cradles, and construction platforms form a three-dimensional labyrinth around which swarm thousands of worker craft and cargo haulers. At the heart of this vast complex, the skeletal structure of a Mars-class battlecruiser takes shape, its massive keel extending nearly 8 kilometers from stern to prow. Fabricator teams apply hull plating in precise sequence, each adamantium section blessed and anointed before being secured in position by servo cranes large enough to lift an entire hab block. Cipra Mundi represents the largest shipbuilding facility in Segmentum Obscurus, capable of simultaneously constructing up to 12 capital ships and countless smaller vessels. The facility's importance to Imperial naval power cannot be overstated. Its production capacity exceeds that of entire subsectors elsewhere in the Imperium. The orbital yards occupy 7 distinct bands around the planet, each specializing in different vessel classes or construction phases. The outermost band, designated Primus, handles initial frame assembly for the largest ship classes, utilizing specialized null-gravity fabrication techniques impossible in planetary environments. The inner construction bands focus on progressively more detailed work, with Secundus handling primary hull plating and void shield generator installation, Tertius dedicated to weapon system integration, and Quartus specializing in drive system assembly. The innermost bands, Quintus through Septimus, handle final outfitting, system calibration, and crew training facilities. This specialized approach allows for continuous production flow, with vessels moving systematically inward through the construction bands as they approach completion. Supporting this massive orbital infrastructure, Cipra Mundi's surface hosts equally impressive manufacturing complexes covering entire continents. These planetary facilities produce the millions of components required for void vessel construction, from mundane hull plates and structural members to the specialized systems that enable warp travel and void combat. The Lacusta Basin complex alone employs over 12 million workers dedicated solely to producing the ceramite ablative plating used in capital ship armor systems, its forges operating continuously for millennia without shutdown. The logistical requirements for maintaining Cipra Mundi's production capacity stagger the imagination. Raw materials arrive from hundreds of mining worlds throughout the sector, with specialized bulk haulers making constant runs between resource extraction sites and the shipyard's processing facilities. The flow of resources requires precise coordination by the Adeptus Munitorum, with shipping schedules planned decades in advance to ensure continuous supply. A single Mars-class battlecruiser requires quantities of materials measured in millions of tons, including specialized elements like adamantium and void-hardened ceramite that can only be sourced from specific worlds. Human resources prove equally crucial to shipyard operations. Cipra Mundi maintains a permanent workforce of over 2 billion, with specialized training facilities producing the technical experts required for every aspect of ship construction. The Scola Navalis Sypraxis trains void frame engineers through rigorous 20-year apprenticeship programs, while the Collegia Astro Cogitatis produces the rare specialists capable of calibrating navigational cogitators. These institutions represent the accumulated knowledge of millennia, their training methods refined through countless generations of shipwrights. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains a substantial presence throughout the Cipra Mundi complex, with the forged Temple Excelsis serving as their primary base of operations. This massive structure, part cathedral and part industrial complex, houses the senior tech priests responsible for maintaining the most sacred aspects of shipbuilding technology. The temple's central sanctum machinatus contains data cores dating back to the Great Crusade, storing irreplaceable STC fragments related to void vessel construction. Access to these archives requires clearance from the fabricator locum of Cipra Mundi himself, with even senior tech priests permitted only limited interaction with the most ancient data. The relationship between the Imperial Navy and the Adeptus Mechanicus at facilities like Cipra Mundi embodies the complex interdependence that characterizes many imperial institutions. While the Navy provides the strategic direction and operational requirements for vessel construction, the Mechanicus controls the technical knowledge and specialized skills required to implement these requirements. This arrangement necessitates continuous negotiation between naval architects and Mechanicus tech priests, with each group maintaining proprietary control over their respective domains while acknowledging their mutual dependence. This tension becomes particularly evident during the development of new vessel patterns or modifications to existing designs. Naval tacticians, drawing on combat experience and strategic analysis, frequently request adjustments to weapons configurations or defensive systems. Mechanicus representatives evaluate these requests not only for technical feasibility, but also for compliance with their understanding of the machine gods, as embodied in established STC patterns. Modifications that deviate too far from recognized templates often face resistance regardless of their tactical merit, reflecting the Mechanicus's inherent conservatism regarding technological innovation. Despite these tensions, the collaborative relationship has produced remarkable achievements throughout Imperial history. The Gothic-class cruiser, developed jointly by naval architects and Mechanicus engineers at Cipra Mundi during the 36th millennium, represented a significant evolution in void warfare capabilities. Its enhanced lance battery configuration addressed specific tactical vulnerabilities identified during the Purge of Conquest, while maintaining sufficient adherence to established design principles to satisfy Mechanicus doctrinal requirements. The pattern's success led to its adoption throughout multiple segmenti, with thousands of vessels constructed over subsequent millennia. The recovery and analysis of standard template construct fragments related to void vessel technology remains one of the highest priorities for both the Navy and Mechanicus. Explorator fleets operating throughout the galaxy maintain standing orders to prioritize recovery of any data storage devices or technological artifacts that might contain shipbuilding information. When such fragments are discovered, they undergo extensive analysis at specialized facilities like the Panopticon Analytiki on Mars, where teams of senior tech priests work to integrate newly recovered information with existing knowledge. The most significant SDC recovery in recent naval history occurred during the boarding action at Helios Minoris, when naval armsmen from the cruiser Inexorable Justice secured a data core from a pre-Imperial research station. Analysis revealed partial templates for advanced void shield harmonization systems capable of increasing defensive efficiency by approximately 23% over standard configurations. After 2 centuries of testing and theological debate within the Mechanicus, these modifications received approval for implementation in new construction, representing a rare example of technological advancement in an institution defined by stasis. Beyond the primary construction facilities like Cipra Mundi, the Imperial Navy maintains an extensive network of secondary shipyards and repair docks throughout Imperial space. These facilities, while lacking the capacity to construct the largest vessel classes, provide essential maintenance and refit capabilities that allow the fleet to sustain operations across the vast distances of the galaxy. The strategic placement of these secondary facilities reflects careful analysis of patrol routes, warp lane stability, and potential threat vectors, ensuring that naval vessels can access support infrastructure without undertaking lengthy journeys that would leave their assigned sectors vulnerable. Port Ma exemplifies the importance of these secondary facilities. Located at a critical juncture of stable warp routes in the trailing regions of Segmentum Obscurus, this massive void station serves as the primary naval base for multiple sector battle fleets. Its repair docks can accommodate up to 20 capital ships simultaneously, with specialized facilities for everything from void shield recalibration to weapons system replacement. During the Gothic War, Port Ma's strategic significance became painfully apparent when Chaos forces targeted it specifically, recognizing that its destruction would severely impact Imperial naval operations throughout the region. The physical structure of facilities like Port Ma reflects both their practical function and symbolic importance. The central docking rings, capable of accommodating vessels up to battleship class, represent masterpieces of void engineering, with massive gravitational stabilizers and atmosphere containment systems allowing for work in pressurized environments despite the scale involved. Surrounding these primary docks, concentric rings contain progressively smaller berths for cruisers and escort vessels, creating a hierarchical arrangement that mirrors the naval command structure itself. Beyond repair capabilities, these secondary bases provide critical logistical support for fleet operations. The supply depots at Port Ma contain sufficient materiel to completely rearm and provision 3 full battle groups, with automated inventory systems tracking millions of individual items ranging from macro cannon shells to survival rations. Fuel repositories hold promethium reserves measured in billions of liters, while specialized storage vaults maintain the rare materials required for warp drive maintenance under carefully controlled conditions to prevent degradation. The administrative burden of coordinating these vast support networks falls to the Adeptus Munitorum, working in conjunction with Naval Logistics Command. The complexity of this task cannot be overstated, ensuring that specific replacement components reach particular vessels across distances measured in thousands of light years, often with unreliable communication and transportation systems. The bureaucracy developed to manage these challenges represents one of the Imperium's most sophisticated organizational achievements, despite its notorious inefficiency and tendency toward ritualized procedures. Supply chains for naval operations typically involve multiple stages of aggregation and distribution. Raw materials from tithe-grade worlds flow to manufacturing centers, where they're converted into standardized components based on production quotas established decades or even centuries in advance. These components move to sector collection points aboard massive bulk haulers, where they're sorted and redistributed to specific naval facilities based on projected requirements. The final distribution to individual vessels occurs when ships dock at naval bases, with requisition officers matching actual needs against available supplies through a process that combines formal documentation with informal negotiation and occasional outright bribery. Bacca Naval Base illustrates the critical importance of these logistics networks. Serving as the primary fleet anchorage for Battle Fleet Tempestus, Bacca's orbital facilities include 16 drydock assemblies capable of major hull repairs and complete internal refits. The station's supply vaults extend deep into the planet's largest moon, with underground repositories containing everything from archived targeting cogitators to preserved foodstuffs. Most importantly, Bacca maintains the largest concentration of warp drive maintenance facilities outside the Sol system, with specialized workshops capable of completely rebuilding damaged transliminal cores, a capacity that proved crucial during the Tyranid incursions that threatened the sector. The technical expertise concentrated at facilities like Bacca represents one of the Imperial Navy's most valuable and vulnerable resources. The Scholastia Navalix trains Void engineers through a rigorous 15-year program combining practical apprenticeship with theoretical instruction in subjects ranging from plasma containment mathematics to the proper rituals for appeasing drive system machine spirits. Graduates receive assignments throughout the sector, ensuring standardized maintenance procedures across widely dispersed fleet elements. The institution's archives contain technical manuals and procedural guides dating back to the Great Crusade, preserved through countless generations of careful reproduction and annotation. Naval bases serve functions beyond mere logistics and repair. They provide essential training facilities for fleet personnel, with specialized environments replicating the conditions found aboard different vessel classes. The combat training decks at Bacca include full-scale mock-ups of standard ship compartments, allowing armsmen to practice void warfare techniques in realistic settings. Gunnery simulators provide weapons crews with opportunities to maintain skills during extended in-port periods, while command staff participate in tactical exercises using detailed strategic simulation chambers that can model complex multi-vessel engagements. The defensive capabilities of major naval bases reflect their strategic importance. Port Mau's outer perimeter bristles with defense platforms equivalent to grand cruisers in firepower, arranged in overlapping fields of fire that cover all potential approach vectors. Void shield generators of unprecedented scale create defensive barriers capable of withstanding bombardment that would destroy conventional installations, while squadrons of system defense boats maintain constant patrol patterns. These defenses serve both practical and psychological purposes, protecting critical infrastructure while demonstrating the Imperium's commitment to maintaining control of essential void territory. The most heavily defended naval facility in the Imperium remains the Mars Naval Base in the Sol system. This massive complex, extending across multiple orbital bands around the Red Planet, serves as both the administrative headquarters for Battlefleet Solar and the primary construction center for the Imperium's most advanced vessel types. The base's defensive grid incorporates technologies rarely seen elsewhere, including temporal distortion projectors that create localized reality fluctuations capable of disrupting targeting systems, and gravitic compression weapons that can implode attacking vessels without risking catastrophic detonations near sensitive infrastructure. Beyond these major facilities, the Imperial Navy maintains thousands of smaller support stations throughout Imperial space. These range from automated monitoring outposts that track vessel movements through critical shipping lanes to resupply depots positioned along common patrol routes. The Rimward Station network in Segmentum Tempestus exemplifies this approach, with 37 identical facilities positioned at regular intervals along the sector's outer perimeter. Each station maintains sufficient supplies to support patrol squadrons for up to 6 months of operations, allowing naval forces to maintain presence in regions that would otherwise require prohibitively long supply lines. The recovery of vessels damaged in combat represents another crucial aspect of naval support infrastructure. Specialized recovery ships like the salvage-class auxiliary vessels combine powerful tractor arrays with extensive repair capabilities, allowing them to retrieve and stabilize critically damaged ships that would otherwise be lost. These vessels typically operate as part of fleet support groups, remaining at the periphery of engagement zones until combat concludes, then moving quickly to secure damaged friendly vessels before they deteriorate beyond salvation. The Mars pattern salvage ship incorporates dedicated tech priest quarters and specialized workshops capable of performing emergency repairs on critical systems like Geller field generators and life support networks. Their massive cargo bays carry prefabricated replacement components for common vessel types, allowing for field repairs sufficient to return damaged ships to major bases for complete restoration. The recovery of even heavily damaged naval vessels represents a significant strategic priority, as the specialized materials and manufacturing processes required for new construction far exceed the resources needed for repair in most cases. The maintenance of warp-capable vessels presents unique challenges beyond conventional mechanical considerations. The Geller field generators that protect ships during warp transit require specialized facilities for proper calibration and maintenance, with dedicated tech priests trained in the esoteric rituals required to appease these systems' machine spirits. Major naval bases maintain transliminal sanctuaries, specialized chambers where Geller field components undergo purification and blessing rituals between deployments, their machine spirits strengthened through carefully preserved ceremonies dating back to the earliest days of warp travel. Similarly, the navigation systems that allow for accurate warp transit require specialized support infrastructure. Facilities for maintaining navigational cogitators exist only at major naval bases, with the complex crystalline computational arrays requiring carefully controlled environments and regular rituals to maintain their connection to the navigator's third eye. The astropathic chambers used for long-range communication undergo regular purification ceremonies conducted jointly by tech priests and sanctioned psychers, ensuring that no warp contamination lingers from previous transmissions. Human resources represent perhaps the most precious commodity maintained by naval support infrastructure. The training of Void Crew requires specialized facilities and experienced instructors, with many skills requiring years to develop properly. Major naval bases incorporate extensive training complexes where new recruits learn everything from basic Void survival techniques to specialized roles like macro cannon operation or damage control procedures. These facilities typically include both conventional classrooms and realistic simulation environments that replicate the conditions found aboard operational vessels. The resurrection of Robute Guilliman as Lord Commander of the Imperium in 999 sent shockwaves through every Imperial institution, but perhaps none felt the impact more profoundly than the Imperial Navy. After 10,000 years of rigid tradition and organizational calcification, the fleet suddenly found itself under the direct scrutiny of a Primarch who remembered firsthand the naval doctrines of the Great Crusade. Guilliman's assessment was characteristically blunt. The Navy had become too slow, too ritualized, and too defensive in its thinking to meet the unprecedented challenges of a galaxy split in two by the Great Rift. The Lord Commander's naval reforms began with a comprehensive review of fleet deployment patterns across all segmenti. What he found troubled him deeply. Centuries of political maneuvering had resulted in disproportionate concentrations of naval power around prestigious systems and sector naval headquarters, while frontier regions often lacked sufficient patrol vessels to maintain imperial authority. In some sectors, up to 40% of nominally active vessels remained perpetually docked at naval bases, undergoing endless cycles of minor repairs and ritual consecrations that kept them from active service without technically violating readiness requirements. Guilliman's first directive fundamentally restructured deployment protocols, establishing the mobilization imperative that required all battle fleets to maintain at least 80% of their capital ships on active patrol rotations. This simple administrative change immediately increased the effective strength of the Imperial Navy by nearly 1/3, without requiring a single new vessel to be constructed. The political resistance was immediate and fierce, with sector admirals and port authorities raising countless objections about maintenance schedules and crew readiness. But Guilliman's position as Lord Commander allowed him to override these concerns with unprecedented authority. The operational reforms extended beyond mere deployment patterns. Guilliman introduced the Rapid Strike Protocol, a new tactical doctrine emphasizing precision warp jumps and overwhelming initial firepower, rather than the methodical, grinding engagements that had characterized Imperial naval operations for millennia. This approach drew directly from Guilliman's experience during the Great Crusade, when legions of Astartes fleets had perfected the art of translating directly into combat range to achieve tactical surprise. The practical implementation required extensive retraining of naval officers accustomed to more conservative approaches, with dedicated tactical simulation facilities established at major naval academies to instill these more aggressive doctrines. Perhaps most significantly, Guilliman addressed the Navy's technological stagnation. Working directly with Archmago's Belisarius Call, he authorized the development of several new vessel patterns incorporating technologies that had been restricted or forgotten during the long millennia of the Imperium's slow decline. The Primaris Space Marines required new transport vessels capable of accommodating their larger physical frames and modified equipment, leading to the creation of the Gladius-class frigate, the first truly new naval vessel pattern to receive full Mechanicus certification in over 3,000 years. The Gladius class represented more than just accommodation for larger transhuman warriors. It incorporated fundamental advancements in void shield harmonization, engine efficiency, and weapons targeting systems. Most notably, its Mechanicus-approved design incorporated refurbished Dark Age technologies recovered by Call during his 10,000-year research project. The plasma drive systems featured improved containment fields that reduced the massive radiation signatures typically associated with Imperial vessels, allowing for greater tactical surprise when approaching enemy systems. The targeting cogitators included crystalline computational matrices that reduced firing solution calculation times by nearly 60% compared to standard Imperial systems. Beyond these specialized Astartes transport vessels, Guilliman authorized the development of the Overlord-class battle cruiser Mark II, an updated version of the venerable pattern that incorporated reinforced structural bracing to accommodate enhanced Nova cannon configurations. The Mark II variant's primary innovation lay in its modular weapons mounting system, allowing for field reconfiguration of secondary armaments without requiring extensive dockyard time. This adaptability proved crucial for fleets operating in the fragmented Imperium Nihilus, where specialized maintenance facilities were scarce, and vessels needed to adjust their capabilities based on evolving threat patterns. For smaller escort vessels, the Sabre-class destroyer emerged as the new standard, featuring enhanced sensor suites specifically calibrated to detect the reality distortions associated with demonic manifestations. These vessels, while lacking the raw firepower of larger ships, provided crucial early warning capabilities for battle groups operating near warp storms or in regions with known chaos activity. Their standardized construction template allowed for rapid production at secondary shipyards, addressing the critical shortage of escort vessels that had developed over centuries of focus on capital ship construction. The practical implementation of these new vessel patterns faced significant resistance from the Adeptus Mechanicus, whose doctrinal conservatism viewed any deviation from established designs with suspicion. Guilliman overcame this resistance through a combination of political pressure, appeals to pragmatic necessity, and carefully framed theological arguments. By presenting the new designs as rediscovered rather than invented technologies, and by ensuring that Call provided appropriate ritualistic frameworks for their production, the Lord Commander managed to secure Mechanicus cooperation without triggering a potentially catastrophic schism within the organization. The greatest challenge facing the Imperial Navy in the era Indomitus, however, was not technological but navigational. The formation of the Great Rift, a massive warp storm stretching across the galaxy rendered traditional navigation charts useless and severed countless established warp routes. Systems that had been reached through routine 2-week warp jumps for millennia suddenly required months of treacherous navigation through unpredictable warp currents if they could be reached at all. Entire battle fleets found themselves isolated on the wrong side of the rift, unable to return to their home bases or communicate reliably with naval high command. Guilliman responded to this crisis by establishing the Navigational Reclamation Initiative, a coordinated effort between the Imperial Navy and the navigator houses to map new warp routes through and around the Great Rift. Special squadron-sized task forces consisting of light cruisers and specialized astrographic vessels undertook hundreds of exploratory missions, each accompanied by multiple navigators from different houses to provide redundancy and cross-verification of newly discovered routes. These missions suffered appalling casualty rates, with nearly 40% of vessels lost to warp phenomena or emerging in hostile territory, but the accumulated data proved invaluable in re-establishing a fragile network of reliable transit corridors. The Pharos project represented a parallel approach to the navigation crisis. Named after the ancient Pharos beacon of Sotha that had provided warp guidance during the darkest days of the Horus Heresy, this initiative focused on establishing a network of psychic beacons at strategic locations throughout Imperium Nihilus. These beacons, while far less powerful than the Astronomicon itself, provided crucial reference points for navigators attempting to traverse the regions cut off from Terra's light. Each beacon required a choir of at least 12 sanctioned psychers, maintained in a state of constant meditative projection, supported by specialized life support systems, and protected by dedicated security forces. The increased importance of navigators in this new era of treacherous warp travel significantly enhanced the political power of the navigator houses. The House of Belisarius, which specialized in charting paths through turbulent warp conditions, saw its influence grow exponentially as its navigators became essential for reliable transit through regions bordering the Great Rift. The House of Ortelius, with its traditional focus on precision short-range navigation, developed new techniques for micro-jumping between stable warp pockets, allowing for incremental progress through regions too disturbed for conventional long-range translation. This newfound navigator influence manifested in unprecedented contractual demands, where once naval vessels typically carried a single navigator with perhaps one apprentice. Ships operating near the Great Rift now required teams of 3 or more full navigators working in rotation to maintain constant vigilance against rapidly shifting warp conditions. The navigator houses leveraged this essential need to secure expanded quarters aboard naval vessels, increased access to ship systems, and formal advisory positions within fleet command structures. Most significantly, they negotiated rights to review and potentially veto particularly dangerous transit plans, a level of operational input previously unheard of in naval history. The psychic awakening that accompanied the birth of the Great Rift created additional complications for naval operations. The sudden increase in psychic phenomena throughout human populations resulted in more frequent manifestations aboard naval vessels, requiring enhanced security protocols and expanded commissariat presence to identify and contain potential threats. More positively, it increased the available pool of potential astropaths, allowing for improvements in the Imperium's strained communication networks as more trained psychic communicators became available for naval service. For vessels operating in Imperium Nihilus, the portion of the galaxy cut off from the Astronomicon's light, the psychic awakening created new tactical possibilities alongside new dangers. Some ship captains reported instances where navigator psyker teams achieved unprecedented synchronization, allowing for intuitive warp translations that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The cruiser Solemnity famously escaped a chaos ambush near the Donler system by executing 7 micro-translations in rapid succession, a feat of navigational precision previously considered technically impossible, with the ship's navigator later reporting that she had seen the patterns between the patterns in a way she could not rationally explain. The administrative challenges of managing a divided navy required substantial organizational innovation. Guilliman established the office of the Lord Admiral of the Nihilus, granting unprecedented autonomy to this position out of simple necessity. With astropathic communication across the Great Rift unreliable at best, naval forces in Imperium Nihilus required authority to act independently while maintaining doctrinal consistency with broader imperial strategy. The first appointee to this position, Lord Admiral Cassandra Agostin, established her headquarters on Calax Bane, a heavily fortified system located near one of the few stable warp routes crossing the Great Rift. Admiral Agostin implemented the Distributed Command Protocol, a system designed to maintain naval effectiveness even when communications with higher authorities became impossible. Under this protocol, sector battle fleet commanders received sealed orders covering multiple contingency scenarios, along with explicit authorization to act on their own initiative if cut off from command. This approach represented a significant departure from traditional imperial command structures, which typically prioritized centralized control over operational flexibility, but the unique challenges of the era Indomitus demanded unprecedented adaptations. The logistical challenges of maintaining naval operations across the Great Rift proved equally daunting. Supply chains that had functioned efficiently for millennia suddenly became untenable as warp routes shifted or disappeared entirely. Guilliman addressed this problem by establishing forward naval logistics bases at strategic locations throughout Imperium Nihilus, each designed to function as a self-sufficient support hub capable of maintaining fleet operations without external supply for up to 5 standard years. These bases incorporated expanded manufacturing capabilities, stockpiles of critical components, and training facilities to replace crew losses, essentially creating miniature versions of major naval bases like Port Maw or Bacca. The Phobos Pattern Naval Base represented the standard template for these new facilities, featuring a central hub with radiating defensive platforms designed to be constructed in stages as resources permitted. Unlike traditional naval bases, which evolved organically over centuries, these new installations followed standardized designs optimized for rapid deployment and defensibility. Their modular construction allowed for expansion as needed, while the standardized layout ensured that naval personnel could transfer between facilities without requiring extensive reorientation. As the era Indomitus progresses, the Imperial Navy continues to adapt to the unprecedented challenges of a divided galaxy. The reforms instituted by Guilliman have restored much of the operational flexibility and aggressive spirit that characterized the fleets of the Great Crusade, while new technologies and vessel patterns have begun to address the material disadvantages faced by Imperial forces. The Navy's traditional strengths, its vast scale, the dedication of its personnel, and its 10,000 years of accumulated void warfare experience remain its greatest assets in the struggle to maintain humanity's dominance among the stars. Yet significant challenges remain. The Great Rift shows no sign of healing, keeping the Imperium divided and straining naval resources across impossibly vast fronts. Xenos threats continue to multiply, with Necron dynasties awakening in unprecedented numbers, while Tyrannid hive fleets approach from multiple vectors. The forces of chaos, emboldened by the galaxy's fracturing, launch increasingly coordinated attacks against Imperial shipping lanes and naval bases. In this new era of unprecedented danger and opportunity, the Imperial Navy stands as it always has, humanity's shield against the darkness of the void and the projection of the Emperor's will across the stars. Though the galaxy has changed beyond recognition, the fundamental mission remains unchanged: to secure the lanes between worlds, to bring the Emperor's light to the darkest reaches of space, and to ensure that humanity endures in a universe determined to extinguish it. As Guilliman himself noted in his address to the gathered Admiralty on Terra, the Navy has always been the thread that binds the Imperium together. Now, more than ever, The strength of that thread will determine whether humanity survives as one empire or fragments into 1,000 doomed kingdoms.